Well, I had the dogman experience back in 2009, North Carolina, when I was camping with my wife. And it affected me quite a bit and got me interested to where I am now.
For anyone who hasn't heard that story, I definitely recommend you tune in. Again, it's episode 95. It'll leave an impression on you. You were contacted by a couple who had a very unnerving story to share with you. How and why did they reach out to you in the first place?
Well, I believe that this couple were having problems for quite some time, and they decided to do something about it. I don't know how long they didn't do anything about it, but they decided to do something about it, and they found my name through a friend of theirs to come in and talk to them.
I can't think of a better guy to reach out to for the situation they were faced with. What was the process you underwent to go from a wannabe researcher to a full-fledged one?
Well, after my experience on the road in North Carolina, or I should say in the swamp, it really did affect me very deeply, and it spurred a lot of curiosity after I was finished being afraid of it. And I felt that I really needed to see what else could be done about finding out more about these creatures. So within that research, I started to contact people who I knew were known researchers in the subject and reached out to them through various means of email and Facebook and possibly a couple of phone calls. And I got a pretty warm reception from a couple of people, which really helped me to begin the process of becoming an investigator.
This field definitely needs more researchers like yourself. You're a huge addition to it. The last time you came on the show, you expressed an interest to me in becoming a researcher for the NADP. Whatever became of that?
Well, I said I was very interested and curious in the subject after my encounter. I reached out to Jody Cook at the North American Dogman Project, and we talked for quite a while, and he gave me a position as an investigator for the project. So now I'm basically covering the Philadelphia area from October to May and Northeast Vermont from June to September. The NADP is really a great organization, and if anyone wants to make a report, they're definitely the ones to contact. They have loads of experience, and I'm very proud and excited to be connected with them. It was really because of my connection with the project that the farmer contacted me, and he felt confident that he would be taken seriously. As the farmer and I have a mutual friend, and that friend is who I told of my connection with the project, and I believe how that all came together was through that.
Dave, I know I'm not the only person who's wondering this. What makes a person want to put themselves into the field researching something as formidable as dogmen?
I think overall it's curiosity. If you can get past the fear factor as much as possible and start to wonder more about what these guys are, where they came from, where they're going to, and that curiosity overrides the fear, then you can put yourself in a position to investigate. And also, there's a lot of people out there that are having a real problem with these guys, and they need somebody to turn to. And if you're willing to do that and help them, then all that much better.
Well, I can't tell you how glad I am knowing that you're in this field researching them. Is researching dogmen everything you hoped it would be? I'm sure like a lot of things, you can think something's going to be a certain way, but once you get into it and actually do it, in a lot of cases it can be totally different. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that is a very rewarding subject in a lot of ways. It's an unknown subject in a lot of ways also, so almost every encounter that you investigate or any lead that you investigate is sometimes completely different from the other one. And you can start to go through them and pick up similarities and differences, and that makes it pretty interesting. I will say that a lot of instances turn out to be explainable, and that's also part of the thing that makes it interesting. I remember a guy told me once that if you see a hoof print, think horse, not zebra. And I've always tried to remember that because a lot of times it turns out to be completely explainable, and that is sometimes better for the person who has called you in to investigate a problem he might be having. If you can give him a perfectly reasonable explanation, sometimes they feel better about that. And if you can't, well, then you go from there. and all of it's interesting.
I like that saying about hoof prints. I actually used that on one of the shows after episode 95 when I heard you mention that. Before you tell us about the Schwenksville incident, Dave, please tell us about the place where it happened.
Well, that was a pretty interesting place for sure. There's a lot of history in southeastern Pennsylvania back to when the first Europeans came over, and after that, all the way up through the 13 colonies to the War of Independence. All of that history seems to have really passed through the whole area. It's actually kind of hard to go through a town or a province anywhere in that area without showing some kind of historical background to the place. This particular place, I'll say Schwenksville, but it's quite a large area. Schwenksville is the center of maybe a 50 to 100 square mile radius of everything we're going to talk about. So this place has been in this couple's family since 1656, I believe, or maybe I'm wrong about, but 1756. So it is a very old-style town. When you go into the town by any direction, it's not built up like a lot of towns are along the major highways. It's still an old rural route, and the town is very laid back and very colonial feel to it. I think that George Washington may have even come through there, and the Continental troops had camped in the area.
Yeah, sounds like it does have a really rich history. The fact that that property has been in the family for so long, that just blows me away. You don't find that very often.
No, and even if you do, you don't really get a complete feel for the intensity of the historical content. I talked to the man about it, and he gave me a full report, and he was very proud of it. He said that he bought the property from his father for $1 back in 1976, and it was owned by his family. Before that, back to 1756, he said that his family purchased the farm from a man called John Paulides, who bought it from a man named Height, and Height purchased it from a guy named Stevenson, who got it from the family of the Penningtons, who got it from William Penn. So we go all the way back to pre-revolution. He was really proud of that. So basically, like everything on the East Coast, it was, I don't want to say owned, but it was inhabited by Native American tribes in the area. And then William Penn took possession of the area of Pennsylvania. And then through that, this family became ownership of the land. Something else about the area was there's a creek that runs through the area called the Perkiomen. The Indian word for that, meaning for that, is muddy waters. They also used to call it the Perquimink. That roughly translates to the place where we were frightened. And I thought, no, that's good.
Oh, I'll bet you did. All right, Dave, please tell us about the Schwenksville incident. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Well, we covered the family's history at the farm back over the last 200 years or so. For whatever history might have rolled over this place, it's still primarily a farm. The couple, or the man, called me, and I came out to the farm, and I sat in the couple's living room and listened to them tell me everything. And it was kind of hard to follow them sometimes, but they did get their story across. They said that it started a long time ago, and that he didn't really believe much of it. He said his father told him some stories from his time as a kid, and he wasn't sure he believed that either. They both put a lot of the activity down to coyotes in the area, and occasional other creatures that might be passing through. But they said that it started with the noise. The noise would start with the obvious coyote vocalizations. And then after that, they started noticing that some of the livestock was missing. They didn't really think too much about the loss of the chickens. But when they were finding larger animals gone or in bad shape, then they really started to get bothered by it. So at one point, I guess back in the late 70s, early 80s, he called someone in, and he said he called him a hunter. I don't really know what else you'd call him, but he came out, and they said that after he was done, the situation quieted down a bit. But then, since then, recently, there has been a lot more activity. Also, since then, they've opened up one of the outbuildings and turned it into a rental cottage. And they're having some problems with people staying there. They're getting bothered by some of the things that were happening on the farm. and they were losing tenants. And I guess when they lost one in the middle of the night and he left suddenly with nothing but a suitcase, that's when I got called. So I came in, and again, I listened to what he had to say, and it was basically what they were feeling and what they were hearing and what they were hearing from the tenants that were on the property. So at some point, the guy told me what he encountered. He said that he was walking the property at night a lot of times with his dogs. This one particular night, he decided to walk out by himself. He heard the coyotes going off, and he walked in their direction. And then as he got close to them, they kind of dispersed like they always did and shrugged shoulders, whatever he might do, head back to the house. So on the way back to the house, he sees shadows moving through the woods and thought, well, okay. And it looks like a guy and maybe a couple of dogs. And he yelled to them that it was private property, and they didn't seem to react to that. So he ran up to them. And when he got close enough, he stopped short. He really didn't know what he was seeing, and it took him a long time to believe his own eyes. But the word he used was dire wolves. I've heard that phrase elsewhere, and I never thought to use it for Dogman, but that's what he used. He said he was pretty terrified. He never saw anything like this. He said that these guys were very large. One of them was man-like, his words, and about 9 feet tall, 4 feet wide. And when he got within 25 yards of them, they all stopped and turned to look at him. He said there were 3 of them, and once he got close enough, they all stood up, and that completely freaked him out. He said the big one snarled at him, and he thought that there were too many teeth in his mouth. That's what he said to me. Thought that was kind of interesting. The only thing that he thought was good about the whole thing was that they didn't follow him. He started to back away. He had a gun with him, and he brought the gun up, but he didn't fire. And he started to back away, and they didn't follow him. And as he got back far enough, the 2 smaller ones dropped back down, all fours, but the large one stayed standing. And as he got back to the house, they just moved off in the same direction they were going before. I guess I could have mentioned that around this farm, on either side of it, one side, there's some game lands, and on the other side is a dairy farm. And they were going in the direction of the game lands. So he went back to the house, and he decided not to say anything to his wife until he was a bit calmer. And then he related the story to her, and they talked about it for a while, and they decided that they needed to get somebody out here and take a look at this. So that's where I came into the story. I listened to their story, and then I had to decide what I was going to do.
When you were sitting there talking with that couple, Dave, did you ever get the impression that his wife might not have bought into his story 100%?
She was looking at him pretty intently. Maybe part of that was because he hadn't related a lot of the story to her that he had just related to me. But after a while, she seemed to nod in agreement with him. Then she had a comment to me, and she said, well, if my husband saw something, then she's learned to take his word for it. So I guess she bought into it at some point.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. I know that's going to be a huge help for him. So that we can better understand, what's the layout of that property like, Dave? Things like what kind of topography is there? Anything like that you can share is what we're looking for.
Well, it's pretty far away from any town in the area. It's about 350 acres, pretty big farm. It's bisected by a couple of roads. It's mostly flat, but there are some hilly sections which contain substantial woods. And there's a lot of trees on the borders of the property. There's a lot of outbuildings, barn and the rental cottage and some other buildings and the house. There's also a lot of trails through the property. There's land on the side where the house and the buildings are, and then there's a big chunk of land on the other side of kind of a main road, and more land over there than there is on the house side. And I'd say at one time, probably back in the 60s and the 70s, it was a real working farm. By the time I got there, there really wasn't much going on there at all. I'd say the only open areas were between the houses and the outbuildings, and the rest of it was overgrown or filled with rusting farm equipment and some dead vehicles.
When you look at the history of that property and how large it is and everything, it sure is a shame to see that it's become so run down like that. Maybe run down's not the word, but to see that it's not a full working farm anymore is kind of depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And I thought the same thing, that here's 350 acres of prime land that at one time was probably extremely productive. And I guess just over time, and as people get older and they don't bring anybody else in to help them, it just declines along with everything else. There is the state game lands to the west of the property, and to the east of the property is a very large dairy farm, which is really well run. And you look at it, it's neat and it's organized. You run into farms where everything's haphazard, but then you find these farms like this one where everything is very well laid out and taken care of. And I got a really good feeling from that farm, and I thought that maybe at one time this farm was like that, but not now.
It sounds like a really neat area. What kind of moving water is in that area? Are there many creeks and streams?
There is. There's the main creek, the Perkiomen, which is, I'd say, about 2 or 3 miles from the property, maybe more. The creek meanders quite a bit, so there are times when the property gets closer to it than others, I guess. There's a couple tributaries to the Perkiomen. There's one creek that runs through the property. It's quite small, maybe just a couple inches deep at times. And I believe that's a tributary to the Perkiomen as well.
Yeah, dogmen would have everything they need then on that property. What more could they want?
Well, there's a dairy farm, if they like milk.
Yeah, I don't think that comes into the picture. At least hopefully not. Have you heard about any neighbors or other residents in that area seeing dogmen before or since the Schwenksville incident?
No, not at all. I haven't really talked to anybody. I don't really know anybody from that area. I do know someone maybe 5 or 7 miles away in another town, but never anything like that at all. I have not been contacted by anyone, so this is really an isolated incident.
Well, that's a good thing then. Please tell us about the researcher Tom you spoke with and his friend Brian, who did a little bit of researching on their own on the farm.
Well, I took the report from the couple, and I decided that I would talk to a couple friends of mine and see if they'd be interested in doing some more in-depth research. So my friends Tom and Brian, Brian's a former Navy SEAL, and Tom served on artillery in Afghanistan. I've known them for quite some time, and they like to do stuff like that, urban exploration and ghost hunts and things like that. So I brought them in, and they went out. We all went out, actually, and did a preliminary look of the property. When I was with them, I did notice something really strange, is that when we went out to the barn area, there was really deep scratches in the barn. I've really never seen anything like this. They were like 4 deep parallel scratches that went all the way around the barn. They did look like animal scratches, but in a weird way. I mean, most animals, when they scratch at stuff, it's interspersed over a pretty large area, and it's kind of random. But these looked like something just took a 4-pronged meat claw and just pulled it right through the wood of the barn. And that was pretty freaky. And it was 5 feet off the ground, which was even worse. And we all looked at each other. And nobody said anything. So we looked around the property, and I walked them the trails with them. And then I left. And they decided to take it on from there. And they said they were going to stay there for a couple of nights. And I said, okay, and I'm ready to take their report when they were done.
I never will understand why dogmen like to do that so much. Maybe it's just the fact that it intimidates you so much when something gouges the wall of a house or a cabin or a barn like that. You talk about creepy, that's just over the top.
Oh, I didn't even know what to say. None of us knew what to say. We looked at it like, something that could do that could very easily just knock right through any wall of a house or a barn or anything else like that. But apparently that's not what it did. It just put these big scratches. I can't imagine what else could have done it. I mean, even before we knew what we were dealing with, that was pretty isolated. That was pretty intimidating.
Oh, I'd say it would be. We didn't see the dog man or whatever it was that made those gouges actually do it. But since there is a history of dogmen doing that on a lot of occasions, it makes it pretty likely that it was a dogman that did that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's it. The reports that came out, they really pointed that direction. And missing livestock and the man's encounter, which couldn't be anything else really in my mind. And then seeing that just kind of cemented the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I'd say so. Those two, Tom and Brian, wound up having their own experience on that property. What happened to them?
I guess they kind of walked into it, didn't they? They decided that they were going to, they told the homeowner they were going to research what was going on the property. So the homeowner said, okay, well, he and his wife decided to go visit her sister in Ohio for a week and leave the farm to them. So they said, all right. And they set themselves up in the cottage and see what they could see. I'll tell you that I know they were armed. I know that each of them had at least 45 and a couple of shotguns, expecting the worst, I guess. See the gouges, maybe you would expect the worst. But they decided to stay in the cottage for a couple of days and nights. They asked me what I had heard from the homeowner, and I explained what he had encountered and what they had been hearing. And they wanted to get a feel for what routines they might go through. So they decided to sit down on the porch of the cottage every night until it got dark. And this they did. And so every night around 9 o'clock or so, the coyotes would start. So the first night the coyotes went off and they left the porch and looked in the woods and approached the wood line. The coyotes stopped and ran off, and they said, okay. They did think they saw a couple of shadows in the woods, but they thought maybe that was the coyotes themselves, and everything seemed to calm down after that. Went back to the house. So the next night, they went out when they heard the coyotes, and they definitely saw shadows moving through the woods. They stopped, and they asked each other what they were feeling, and was not a good feeling, apparently. So they went out deeper into the woods this time, and the deeper they got, the worse the feeling got. At one point, Tom saw what he thought was a large dog eating something on the ground. And he didn't know what it was. And got a little closer, brought his gun up, and at that point he said the wind seemed to shift, and whatever it was turned and looked at him. He turned and looked at Brian. Brian lost his bladder. So they went in, they saw this guy, and he stood up, turned to face him. And he told me that he heard the legs make noise when he stood up. So at this point, I think I want to say something about my encounter back in North Carolina, because that's exactly what I saw. And I don't know what that is. They seem to stand up on their two legs, and their legs seem to pop into place. And the closest thing I can relate to that is I used to know a guy that had a dislocated shoulder. He could pop it out, which I have no idea why he'd do that, but he'd pop it out and then he'd pop it back in again. And it sounded just like that, except maybe 20 times louder. So I'm not really sure why they're doing it or what they're doing or what advantage they have by standing up, but they seem to all do it. And I'd like to know why. I'd like to know what it is that makes them want to stand up like that, what advantage they have doing that, and what the mechanism is. I'll tell you, it freaked me out back in 2009, probably more than anything else in the encounter, even though there were scarier parts. Well, back to these guys. Luckily for them, there was only one of them. They said he stood up, he shook into place, and showed his teeth, and snarled at them. They described the snarl as like a high-low growl, almost like a European fire engine, but in the guttural way. They thought also that there was way too many teeth in this guy's mouth. I mean, he growled at him, showed their teeth, and he's thinking, mouth like a shark, and way too many teeth. He told me he started thinking it was a bad idea to interrupt the guy's dinner. Well, He said he thought about emptying his clip. He really thought about emptying his clip into this guy, but he decided not to. And one of the reasons he said he decided not to is because it seemed to him that the dogman was looking at their guns. He was standing there very threatening, but he was looking straight at the guns as if he recognized them. I guess that's something. So he said after what seemed to be eternity of no one moving, he was just about to shift position, and the dogman took a step backward. And that's pretty amazing. He couldn't imagine that he was afraid of them, but he took a step backward. And then he took another step backward. And he dropped to all fours and started moving off. And they didn't move. They were just standing there looking at him. They were having kind of, a standoff. And at some point, the dogman decided to move off. So, I really don't know what to do at this point. I'm sure that it may have gone through their mind they're about to get ripped to shreds by some enormous creature, but that didn't happen. It moved off and started moving toward the dairy farm. He said that it hit the electric fence at the property line, and it didn't seem to faze him at all. It just kind of surprised him a little bit, and he moved off. And so he turned around just in time to see another one moving off from behind them and circling around to meet the first one. And this one hadn't made any noise at all. I'm really surprised by this. They also described this guy to be about 2 feet shorter and without so much of a pinched waist. So, might have been a female. I guess we'll never know. So, they left also, backed off, and went to the cottage and decided to see what would happen next. So, they were in the cottage, starting to relax a little bit, if that's the right word. Brian was upset. He told Tom he didn't know what the hell that was. And, he's used to dealing with humans and couldn't figure out what that was. And Tom told him that he might have to expect something a little strange. That's why I brought him out there. So they started to relax a bit in the cottage, and right about that point, they heard the most horrific howl they'd ever heard in their lives. Scared the crap out of them. And it was close. Just they're trying to think about what that might be or where it might be. Started hearing stuff hitting the roof, like maybe rocks or clumps of dirt, and hearing scratches on the side of the house and thinking, oh, geez. Seeing the scratches on the barn, well, the cottage they were in had half the thickness of the barn walls. So they're just waiting for this thing to come right through the wall, but it did not. The scratching noises, the noises on the roof. After a while, that all stopped. So they waited, and after a while, the crickets started up again, he said, and then they did something that they had wanted to do, that they had planned to do going into this, and they had shared with me, is that they wanted to see what they would react to for a shotgun blast. So after everything kind of calmed down from the cottage at that point, they each went out and fired off their shotguns. And it seemed to work. The night passed very peacefully after that. The cricket noises came back. Everything seemed to calm down. They didn't have that watch feeling that they had before, and thought maybe they had some good luck here. So they waited 6 a.m. morning time and went back out and went into the woods and didn't really see any signs of anything. No clumps of dirt laying around like it hit the roof or anything. They did find the remains of a calf that guy was eating in the same spot where they had encountered him. And that made me think that they might be raiding the dairy farm. So they have state game lands on one side and a dairy farm on the other. And maybe they're just using this property as a thoroughfare between the two food sources. And we all kind of agreed to that. So the two guys spent another night at the farm, and there was no encounter, there was no reaction, there was no obvious happenings between dogmen and them for a full 24 hours. And the night after that, the same kind of thing, the homeowner came home from Ohio and asked them if they saw anything. And they told them what happened, more or less. And I came back into it at this point, and we all sat down and talked about it. And we reiterated the thought that this farm of theirs might be a thoroughfare for large predators. We never used the word dogmen, but large predators. He used the word direwolves. We just let him say it. So then we told him maybe he should research and see how big of a fence he could put up on the property. Every township has different ordinances. We suggested that he might want to put up a deer fence or a cow fence as high as the township will allow him on the property perimeter, and possibly electrify it. Because if these guys were crossing through his property to get between the food sources, maybe he could push them to a different trail. Maybe. So when I left the last time, he said he had planned on doing that.
I sure can't imagine what it would be like to live on a property like that when you know those things are around and could pop up at any moment.
Yeah, I would imagine that does make for some sleepless nights.
Oh, I'd say so. You just mentioned that high-low snarling sound that Tom and Brian reported hearing. That reminds me of all the eyewitnesses who have reported hearing that kind of sound from a dog man when it was snarling at them. They said it sounded a lot like an espresso machine.
Well, my own experience, I didn't hear that. In fact, I've never heard that. Back in '09, when I encountered them in the swamp, the one that snarled at me was a very just low growl, and it didn't seem to change pitch at all. It was almost like a dog growl. So I was interested when Tom had said what this sounded like. It was foreign to me, but now you say that it's not foreign at all. It's reported quite a bit, and that's interesting.
It does seem to be reported quite a bit, so it's definitely not unprecedented.
Yeah, that's odd. I thought it was odd, but maybe it's not odd. Maybe it's just, I don't even know what to say, breed related. Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to say. How long have you known Tom?
Let's see. I've known Tom about maybe 6 years. 6 years, that's all right. I really didn't know the other guy very much. I'd met him a couple of times, but I didn't know him personally like I knew Tom. And, you know, Tom's a good guy. Lost his hearing in Afghanistan, shooting off too much 155 millimeter, I guess, but he's a good guy. He is definitely an adventurous type. And when I told him about this, he kind of jumped at the chance to see something different. I guess he wasn't really prepared for how different it was going to be, huh?
Yeah, I'm sure you didn't expect it to be that different. And after living through something like that, I've got to wonder if it didn't knock some of that adventurous spirit out of him.
Yeah, well, that could be. I haven't heard from him since. He has not contacted me. He didn't specifically say that he never wanted to see me again, as I've run into that before, but it seemed like we should be contacting each other and we're not. So maybe he's got to take some time with us.
Yeah, it sure sounds to me like that might be what's going on. What's the current state of affairs on that farm, Dave?
Well, I contacted the owner one more time after I had left to see what he was doing. And he said that he put the fence up. He had a professional fence company come in and put up an 8-foot fence backed by a deer fence. So it was kind of a wooden farm fence backed by deer fencing. And he was in the process of electrifying it. He has said that he's always armed. He's always got a pistol and a Bowie knife is what he said he carries with him at all times. But he told me that since he's put the fence up, he hasn't had anything close. And I asked him what that meant. And he said, well, that he had gone out into the property at night, which is something he wasn't doing for a long time, because the coyotes weren't coming in anymore. I guess they're not getting past the fence. And he said that he may have seen shadows moving off, but at a much more distant point, maybe 300-400 yards, far enough that he couldn't tell what they were. Could have been anything. But the important point is that he's not getting traffic like he was getting.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that fence seems to be helping. As far as long-term would go, I've got serious doubts that it's going to keep them out of there. With the way they can jump, with as intelligent as they are, if they want to get in, I've got no doubts that they're going to be right back in.
You know, I thought about that when I was telling him about the fence. I thought, you know, he can put a fence up, but these guys might just jump right over it. If there's something on his property that they want, there's not a lot that's going to keep them out. I'm hoping that they just wanted a dairy farm and the game lands, and maybe there wasn't anything of interest on his farm. But on the other hand, I don't know how long these things have been around, and just like humans are creatures of habit, if they've been traversing his property to get from one place to another, I'm not sure whether just putting up a fence is going to break that behavior. But so far, he hasn't seen anything, but that's not to say they weren't there.
I wish I could say differently, but I've got serious doubts that the fence will break that behavior. But you never know.
You never know. That's what I said to him.
That's right. Do you have any trips planned back to the farm?
I thought about going back on my own and just making a spontaneous visit and see what was going on, thinking to myself that maybe that kind of a visit might have an unrehearsed reaction, but I decided against it. The way I left it with him is that if he felt the need to give me a call, he hasn't done that, so I'm not going to do anything unless he does.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. At any time while you were listening to that property owner or Tom talk about their experiences on that farm, did you start to second guess your decision to research dogmen?
You know, I'd really like to say that I didn't, but I'll tell you, there was a good amount of time between my encounter and this one, and maybe that amount of time, I wouldn't say made me forget, but it gave me a buffer of safety, possibly. Because now, when we start to dig up these old memories and start to see the similarities between my close encounter and theirs, it makes me wonder whether I want to get that close again.
Oh, I can definitely understand that. I think you'd only be fooling yourself if you didn't admit that.
Yeah, I think that I made the right decision to have someone else do deep investigation. I had said that I wanted to investigate the dogman, and I wanted to get involved with various groups to do that. And I think it's a good idea to go in and take a report and file it. I'm not quite sure whether it's a good idea to investigate each one in depth. You might get into a situation that you can't control or handle. You never know, again.
You never do know. I agree. That's why it's so hard to understand how people can go out, especially alone, into the night into places where they know that dogmen frequent, without any backup plan or anything like that. To each their own, and if you want to do that, I've got nothing but respect for you, but I just can't understand that. Back when you were having your encounter that night on that lonely road, would you ever have imagined you'd be actively researching dogmen like this?
No. At the time that happened, I had definitely thought that, again, I was interested. After the fear wore off, I was interested, but I didn't see myself actively searching them out. I never wanted to have another encounter, and if I was going to be researching, well, something like that might happen. But no, the answer would be I would never imagine myself actively searching them out. What you said before about people going out alone without any backup plan, well, that's just crazy. If I was going to go out and do some serious on-hands research, I would never go alone. I'd always bring somebody with me. I would make sure that people that knew me knew where I was going and when I'd be expected back. I would bring a couple of days worth of equipment or supplies, because you never know what's going to happen. You might be out there, you want to be out there for a couple hours and it turns into an overnight ordeal. So you definitely want to bring some things with you in case that were to happen. And possibly a weapon of some kind. I mean, I usually would do that when I travel around, but not always. So, yeah, investigating is pretty cool, and it turned out to be really great, but I think that you need to consider a lot of safety procedures going into that.
It's only prudent to do that. You know, Dave, I read you wrong. When you told me you wanted to start researching dogmen, I had the impression that you wanted to go out and beat the bush and look for them, but from what you're saying, I get the impression that you don't want to do that as much as speak with eyewitnesses and document the information that they have to share about their encounters. Is that accurate?
In a way, I think that I want to try and balance the two and not 50-50 either. I think that I really want to talk to people about their experiences and try and help them get through them on one hand. And on another hand, yeah, I would like to get out there personally and check it out, but I think I'd like to do it in a less random way. This particular incident was fortunate that there were two guys ready to go out there and check this out, not knowing at all what they were going to come up against. I mean, there was a little bit of background there, but their encounter turned out to be maybe worse than the other guy. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. I wasn't there. But I think that part of me wants to go out and, like you said, beat the bushes and actively seek them out with other people, with safety in mind, with a backup plan, possibly an escape route. And I would like to do that. I think that it's kind of like maybe a 70-30 thing rather than a set way of doing things.
Well, you've got a great head on your shoulders if you do decide to go out and beat the bushes looking for these things. I can't imagine a better person to be out there doing that, so I think you will have good luck if you do decide to do that in any capacity.
Well, like I said, I do plan on doing it. I think it's going to be more or less as things come up, spur of the moment, possibly. I have a guy that called me a couple of weeks ago in middle northeastern Pennsylvania, I'd say. If I were to put a town to it, I'd say the eastern area. And he had an encounter of sorts that he related to me, and he wanted me to come up and listen to what he had to say. And I know the area pretty well. My mom grew up in that area. And that is an instance where I think I might want to check it out. There's a lot of strange history up there as well. But from what he said and what he described, I think I'd be interested in going out on that one.
Well, if you do decide to head that way and research it, I hope it turns out well for you.
Well, if I do, and it does, you'll be sure to hear about it.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, please do keep me in the loop. Well, Dave, it's about time to wrap this thing up. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, I gotta say that this encounter was completely different from my last one. In a way, I guess I thought it out. I'm not sure that everybody should do that. I know that the last time I came on and we were talking about this, I had said that I thought that people shouldn't stop what they were doing because of these encounters, that the state parks and the national parks and recreational activities were there for us to enjoy, and we should still go out and do them. With that in mind, like anything else or any other negative experience that may happen, people just need to be more aware of their surroundings and take a look and see what might be in the area they're in more than they would. I know that I do that now. And with this, I actively went out to see what was going on rather than having a chance encounter. So there's a difference there, meaning you want to go out and have a good time with the recreational activity and be more aware of your surroundings. And then on the other side, if you're going to go out and investigate, I guess the same thing holds true 100 times more if that's what you decide to do. So I certainly wouldn't dissuade anybody from doing anything. But I think with everything that's going on in the world, we just have to be more aware of our surroundings.
That's not a bad idea. Dave, thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for coming on the show tonight and sharing this info with us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Vic.
Have yourself a great night.
Bye.
Bye. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Because of things I've got going on right now, I didn't have time to properly prepare a show for this week. So what I decided to do was, I decided to put together a Nothing But Encounters show for you. The encounters you're going to hear on tonight's show start at episode 78 and move forward until present time. If you were a guest on the show from episode 78 on and don't hear your encounter featured on tonight's show, please don't take that as a slight. I definitely don't mean it that way. For tonight's show, I just decided to air the scariest encounters. Starting things off for us tonight is Martin Fink, episode 78.
First of all, I want to give a layout of the area so you can all follow me when I'm talking about the encounter. My parents' house is up hills in a valley with a few other houses, and the valley is surrounded by a thick forest area. You can drive down hills from this valley. There are two roads, one to a little village down hills, and you have to cross a bridge before you get to the village, and the other road, it takes 15 minutes with a car to get to the city. It's a little city, but anyway, in Austria you're not allowed to drive until 18, but at 15 you're allowed to make a moped license. So that's a very low-powered bike. It goes maybe 20 to 25 miles an hour. I was 15 at the time and I had my moped license, and I visited a friend down at the village. So I drove down, we spent the day together, it got dark out, it was late fall, what I remember, and I stayed a little longer than I usually did. So it got pretty dark outside. And this little road that goes through the forest to the village, it has absolutely no street lights. So all I had was my little lamp on my moped that gave out a little light. But anyway, so it's gotten dark outside and I was driving up hills towards my parents' house again. As soon as I was on the bridge, I could see something on the right side in the forest. As soon as the bridge ends, there starts the forest line on the right side, and this forest goes all the way up. All the way the road goes, there is forest. And I could see movement on the right side, but I didn't know what it was, and at that time I didn't care. I thought it may be a deer or something. So I was driving, and as soon as I passed the point where I thought I saw movement, something stepped out on the road, and I only saw it when I looked in the side mirror, and I saw these these big yellowish eyes not far away from me, maybe 2 feet. And this thing, whatever it was, followed me halfway through the forest until we reached a little fork. A farmer has cut a little way into the forest and made a barrier there, like a railroad barrier that was always down, and this thing always stayed behind me 2 feet. as soon as we were at this spot, this thing just beamed towards the barrier and jumped right over it and ran into the forest, and it was fast. It was maybe, my moped, as I already told, went 20, 21 miles an hour. This thing could easily have gotten me. It went 2, 3, maybe 4 times as fast as my moped. Yeah, that was my first encounter with this dog, man. I want to add, we don't have bears or wolves in Austria. We had one bear a few years back, but not in my area. This was on the other side in Austria, and he crossed to Bavaria and was shot. So we don't have bears or wolves, and why should a deer follow me so close behind for such a long period of time? It's not. Yeah, this would be my first encounter. This thing didn't make any noise, just when it stepped out to the road. The bushes and the little trees that were put aside, this was the only noise this thing made. There was no other noise. No. Well, maybe there was noise, but I couldn't hear it because of the engine of my moped. But no growling, no other sounds.
Mark Strum, episode 79.
It was approximately 1965 when I go back. I was still in grade school. I was approximately 10. My parents went off shopping, and kids being kids, 10 years old. I don't want to go home. I want to go with you. I'm a big boy. So they left me home. And I'm watching TV, doing kid stuff, playing with my G.I. Joe dolls, which was a big thing at the time. And I had the idiot box on watching TV, and I'm just sitting there minding my own business. It's dark out, maybe about 8, 9 o'clock at night. And it's quiet, so I'm just sitting in the living room. Well, I live in the trailer, and I'm in the living room. There's a combination with kitchen. You go down the hallway, and there's 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, and then the master bedroom. There's a bathroom way before that, but anyway, I'm sitting there in the living room. I hear this rapping coming from the back bedroom on the window. And I ignore it for a little bit, and I hear it again. All right, what the heck is this? So I get up out of the chair that I'm spinning in, and I walk down the hallway, and the curtains are drawn. And I hear a rap again. I open the curtains, and this thing is looking at me. And it looked like a giant wolf. I mean, I didn't know what to do. And it had a grayish black fur. It was enormous. The head was enormous. The teeth, I'll never forget the teeth. They were enormous, and they were a whitish color that went up to a yellowish color, stained yellowish. Kind of like a tartar, like they've been used a lot, like tartar color. And it had like a pinkish tongue, and I looked at the eyes, and they were bright red. And oh, man. And the thing just let out this low growl, and it hit me, and it's like, I didn't know what to do. I was frozen. And I looked at it, and it had ears that shot up on either side of his head that looked like a timber wolf. And on top of each ear, there was 3 hairs. But it felt like it hated me. For some reason, it hated me. It was full of malice. Like, if it wanted to kill me, it was going to kill me. And it just stared at me and stared at me and stared at me. And I looked down, and the thing was standing up. It wasn't leaning. It was standing up. and it pulled his head back like it was going to smash the glass with his snout. And I took off running. That fast, I bolted. We had rolling doors in the bedroom. I rolled the door in the bedroom. Now I think about it, it's funny. It could have went through that trailer like a Cracker Jack box, went through that door like cardboard. I ran down, went in my bedroom, grabbed a .22 rifle. I had a Remington tubular loaded it up with .22s, ran down, jumped in the chair, and just sat there, frozen. I wouldn't look out the windows. I was scared to death of looking at any windows around me. Probably looking at me, I don't know. But I just stared at the wall. I wasn't paying attention to TV. I wasn't doing anything. Then after a while, my parents came in. My mother was looking at me like, "What are you doing with a gun?" I saw kids stumbling around. No. And she gave me a royal about having a gun. Well, I said something to my father. He didn't say anything. So, okay. I didn't sleep all that night. At all, man. This thing scared me. I'll never forget it. It's burned into me. But I felt that it took something from me. I feel like I'm linked to it. Like it somehow did something that I'm linked to it that, how can I explain it? It could have tore me up if it wanted to. But it didn't for some reason. It let me for some reason, but it took something from me. But anyway, the next morning I went up the street to, at that time, my best buddy, Bobby. I said, "Bobby, you got to see this." Well, it had rained that night. And he come down and, "Look at the tracks. Holy Christmas." And they were bigger than my hands put together. Standing at the window, and this thing must have been 8 foot tall to look in that window, because this trailer was up on stilt things, on cinder blocks. And to look halfway through, it must have been 8 foot. So we followed the tracks down towards the woods. And all of a sudden, bing, they stopped. And we're looking around where there's trees around us. So we never paid it no mind. Maybe it jumped in a tree or something. I don't know. But every time I went down in those woods, the hackles on the back of my head would stand up, and I was gone. And at nighttime, you would never catch me down there. It was like, for some reason, something was down there. And then years later, I came back to that place. It was called Trench's Woods. I still feel like there was something watching me, and I would never go out in those woods at night. And even at night when I lived there, I would never go out in the backyard at night. And I was grown then. And even to this day, at 60 years old, I will not go outside at night in a rural area without having some kind of firearm on me. But that thing was the biggest wolf thing I've ever seen in my life. And it could have just chewed me in half. It was gigantic. And it was a monster dog. And the head on it was the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life. It makes a German Shepherd or a normal timber wolf look like a pup. And it was just the feeling of it that it radiated was so evil. It was like it was saying to me, "I'm the king of the mountain and you're nothing. Stay away from me or I'll hurt you." And to this day, it has affected me, so I'm very well aware of my surroundings at all times. And if you're traveling at night in cars, stay away from real dark wooded areas. Be very aware. Because these things are big enough to turn your car over, do whatever they want to do. And I get the feeling they're just like people. You have good, you have bad. You got some that just like to tear your butt up. They're just like people. But you just don't know what they are or what their intent is. And I don't trust them. But see, you want to go the other direction, please. Well, that's about all I can say about the darn thing.
Danielle Stedman, episode 83.
This happened in September or October of 1987. Around here, there was a lot of farmland, so we had a lot of woods. I had a boyfriend who was 16 years old. So I was still 14. He could come to my house and hang out, but I wasn't allowed to, quote, car date, as my mother called it. So at around midnight, I snuck out of the house, which is a very bad thing to do, I know. But I snuck out of the house, and I met him, and we went to pick up one of my good friends, Jill, and then we went to get Jill's boyfriend. Jill's boyfriend lived down a very long road. It was a long dirt road. In fact, there was a lot of dirt roads around here at that time. Because my boyfriend had a 69 Camaro, it was very loud. So he decided to park it at the end of his dirt road, and he would just walk down and get him. So we proceeded to park the car. And I don't think it was a full moon night, but there was enough moonlight that night that he didn't even take a flashlight because it was lit up enough just by the moon that he could see. So he got out of the car, and he left us sitting in the car with the radio playing while he went to retrieve her boyfriend. Well, he hadn't been gone very long. I guess it had been probably 10 minutes. And I was sitting there, and I was talking to Jill. And the first thing I noticed was that there was this horrible, horrible smell. And when I say it was horrible, I mean it was the most god-awful stench that I have ever in my life encountered. It smelled like rotten meat, like once, I guess, maggots had set in. And then it had this really musky, pungent odor. Closest I can come to describing it would be it's the smell a boar hog kind of puts off. There was a smell of wet dog, and then the most disturbing of the smells was the smell of blood. And if you've ever been raised like me where you kill your own, you know that smell of blood. It's like a metallic kind of iron smell in the air. But that was the smell that this thing was putting off, and it was extremely, extremely strong. My friend was talking away, and I interrupted her, and I asked her, I was like, do you not smell that? And at first she was like, smell what? And I was like, Jill, you don't smell that? And she took a good whiff, and then she was like, ooh, yes, what is that? And I said, I don't know, but I don't remember smelling that when we pulled up. And she was like, well, it had to have been here, but you would have thought if we had noticed that when we first pulled up, I would have never let him park there. But she convinced me that, okay, maybe the smell had been there and it just hadn't gotten to us yet. So she went about talking, and it was so bad, though, we had to take our shirts and pull them up over our nose and, like, smell the inside of our shirts because they smelled like perfume. Well, it probably wasn't just a few minutes later, not I don't even think it was 5 minutes, but there was a subtle nudge of the car from the back. It just felt like somebody kind of gently rocked the car. Well, we both felt it, and Jill shut up, and she was like, what was that? And I didn't know what it was either, and it kind of scared me, and it scared her too, and I was like, I don't know. And then it dawned on me, at this point, it had almost been 15 minutes, so if our boyfriends had run, they could easily be back by now. And I just kind of smiled at her, and I said, it's probably the guys, whispered, it's probably the guys trying to scare us. And she was like, well, let's just ignore it, and, we'll just act like we didn't even feel it. So that's what we did. She went back to talking, and I need to let the listeners know that we had been in the car long enough that, and talking, the windows had all fogged up from us talking, so we couldn't really see out of them because they were so foggy. Well, it was just a minute later, and there was another kind of rock of the car. We just kept talking and ignored it. But then the car got shook really forcefully. This time we kind of laughed and we yelled out to the guys that it wasn't going to work. We knew it was them, and they weren't going to scare us, and that they just needed to stop and come on. Well, there was no reply. And then there was another shake of the car. Again, pretty forceful. I told them, cut it out, come on. And at this point, Jill was saying, come on too, wasn't going to going to work. And we even yelled their names, but there was no reply. Well, the next time the car shook, it came from the front, and this time it was downright violent. I remember Jill and I, at that point, we both kind of quit smiling because it was shook hard enough that I thought, I'm not so sure my boyfriend would do something like that to his car. And at that point, we started trying to look out the windows. And like I said, this car was an older Camaro, and he had just put a lot of money into it. I know it sounds silly, but I didn't even want to take my hand and wipe the fog away from the windows because I knew he would fuss at me for getting fingerprints all over it. So we were just kind of straining, trying to see out of the windows. But we really couldn't see anything. This time, we yelled at them again, okay, it's not funny. They've scared us, ha ha. Get in the car, let's go. Because we were still thinking at this point that it was our boyfriend. Well, they didn't answer us. Like I said, that was beginning to really scare us. So I cut the radio down to see if we could really hear anything, like hearing them laugh or anything, but we didn't hear anything. And again, there was another violent shake, and we screamed again for them to stop. They were scaring us to cut it out. Well, then we kind of said, guys, and when we said that, that's when we heard this very low, deep, guttural kind of growl. And it sounded like some type of dog or something. It scared the crap out of both of us because it just sounded so sinister and evil-like. And it was the type of growl that kind of resonates in your chest and it sends cold chills up and down your spine. And I remember the hair on the back of my neck started to stand, and I was really freaked out by it, and so was Jill. Sorry, I start to get really nervous at this point. It didn't really sound like an ordinary growl. I can't, like from an ordinary dog, I guess. I can't really describe it, but there was just something really troubling about that growl. I was like, what in the was that? I remember I looked back at my friend, and all the blood had drained from her face, and she just looked like she was terrified. And then the next thing we heard, it sounded like somebody was taking their fingernails, and they were actually coming from the front driver's side quarter panel all the way down to the door, just scratching the car. And I don't mean like barely scratching the car. I mean, you could tell that this was very deep because it was really loud. And at that point, I realized this is definitely not my boyfriend or her boyfriend because, one, he would never do that, and he surely would never allow that to be done to his car. And I remember just sitting there and just watching from the inside as this noise come down the car, and when it got to the handle, the driver's side handle, it actually tried to lift it. It tried to lift the door handle. And at this point, I jumped across and just slammed the lock because it wasn't locked. Well, when I did this, this has now put me literally inches from the glass, maybe 1.5 inch. And although I couldn't really see out of it, I just knew there was something on the other side of that freaking glass. I don't know, I guess everybody says that you know when something's kind of staring at you, and that's how I felt. I felt like there was something on the other side of the glass that, although I could not see it, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was staring at me. And that's when I started to feel very, very scared. And when I say scared, I mean a type of fear that I've never felt before. This was like more of a primal fear. Like your life is in danger. You just know that there's something definitely not right with this situation. And I was just absolutely, totally frozen with fear. I remember thinking, what in the world could this possibly be? Because, like I said, we realized it's not the guys playing a prank on us at this point. So you kind of run through your head, what in the world could be on the other side of that door? I thought, well, okay, maybe it's a dog, because it did sound canine. And then I even went to, well, maybe it's a wild boar, because we had wild boar, but they were up in the mountains, and I thought, well, maybe one found its way down here. I didn't know what it was, but with the smell and then that, we knew it was some type of animal that we were dealing with. And I don't know why, but as scared as I was, I just absolutely had to reach up. I wanted to see what was on the other side of the window. I don't know why, but I wanted to see what was on the other side of the window. So, like an idiot, I reached up and I actually just kind of smeared a little spot away from the window. And when I did, on the other side, I saw a nose and a muzzle. And when I did that, the thing snorted and actually left steam on the other side of the glass. And I only saw it for a brief second because then it stood. And when I say it stood, I mean it stood up on its 2 feet. So whatever was on the other side of the door was definitely not what I thought it was. And then at the time, I didn't know if I was seeing things or what was going on. But I could have swore this freaking thing actually stood up. And I remember I was so freaking terrified. I remember it growled when it did that and stood, and then the car started to shake, and I jumped back into my seat. Jill was wanting to know what in the world was on the other side of the glass, and I didn't know what to tell her. And then the car's shaking, and when I say the car's shaking, I mean at this point, this thing has gotten a hold of the car, and it's shaking the car. I mean just back and forth, shaking it and shaking it. Jill's in the back seat. She's screaming and crying. I'm up front. I'm all upset. I don't know what this thing is that's outside of the car. Like I said, the car is shaking. I know in my mind I was thinking, did I just see an animal stand up? And I was thinking, did I see a dog stand up? But that made no sense. And the muzzle had looked like the muzzle of like a German Shepherd or possibly even a wolf. And while it was shaking the car, it was just growling ferociously. I mean, it just sounded horrible. And it was, it was horrible. I was trying to tell Jill to hush and be quiet because it seemed like the more noise we made, the worse it was. The worse the growling was, the worse the shaking was, and I was thinking this whole time, oh my God, this thing is going to bust the glass and it's going to get us. Well, I was sliding down in the front seat, trying to get down in the floorboard as far as I could get. I was trying to tell Jill to get down and to try to get her to hush up. Then all of a sudden, it just quit shaking the car. And we could hear it moving around. We could hear it sniffing at the windows. We heard it step back. And when we heard it step back, you knew it was still on 2 legs. So that meant this thing is bipedal. We heard it step back, and then we kind of saw it move around to the back of the car. And when I talked to you in the pre-interview, and when I had first contacted you through email, I didn't talk to you about its hands. Well, for me, Vic, that was one of the hardest parts of this night. It's still, when I think about that thing's hands, this thing had hands like a raccoon. It wasn't normal. It wasn't paws. It was hands. Like if you were to take a raccoon's hands and you were to like blow them up like 15 times their size, that's what you were talking about. And when this thing had stood, I was looking at its genitalia and its thighs. So that's meaning this thing is 7 to 8 feet tall. Because even though a Camaro is low to the ground, I mean, they're not that low. And if I'm looking at their thighs and genitalia and it was male, then that means this thing was just huge. And then we could see the silhouette of it, but we couldn't like see it. And that's when we saw its hands, and you could see that by its hands and stuff, it looked like its arms were really long. So, I mean, I'm just guessing because we couldn't see it all the way, but we were looking at basically arms and its hands and, like, its navel and some of its thighs and stuff. So that means its whole upper body, or most of its upper body, was still up in the air. Anyway, like I said, the hands really creeped me out. They looked like raccoons. It had claws, not as long as what the movie makes them out to be, but they were pretty long, like a grizzly's claws, I'd say. Which I guess that is pretty long, but I don't know. In the movies, they just make them ridiculously long. Then we heard it come down, so now it's back down on all fours. And then it started messing with the lock. Jill had calmed down a little bit, and thank God, because we could hear it. It sounded like this thing was trying to figure out how to unlock the trunk. And I was thinking, oh my God, this thing is trying to get in here to us. But again, I thought I had seen an animal. And in fact, I thought I'd seen a dog. Okay, what kind of dog walks on two legs and is intelligent enough to try to get in through a trunk? I mean, like they're trying to figure it out, like a human being would, like type of human intelligence. My mind was reeling. I had no idea what we were dealing with. All I know is I was terrified. Well, it was at this point that it also dawned on me that my door was not locked. So as scared as I was, and I was pretty far down in that car, in the floorboard, I reached up and I had to lock that door. On those old cars, anytime you lock them, they make a really loud sound. So I was hoping it wouldn't be that loud, but unfortunately, when I clicked it and it engaged, it was really loud. When that happened, it was like the thing quit messing with that lock back there, and you could hear it. It was like he paused, so it was like you knew he heard it. And then all of a sudden, he ran, and we could hear him ran on all four around to my side of the car. And it's sniffing. You can hear it on the other side, and it's sniffing at that door. Now, you talk about terrified. Now my fear level goes up even more because now I'm back to dealing with this thing, and it's on my side of the car. And again, I'm within inches of it, even though there's a car between us, and I can hear it smelling around my door. Oh, God.
Hey, it's okay. We'll be right back.
Anyway, now this thing's on the other side of the car door, and it's on my side of the car door, or I don't know how to say that. It was on my side of the car, just outside of my door, and you could hear it sniffing and stuff. And then it quit sniffing, and it pulled at the door. It tried to lift the door handle again. Well, I had scooted around and positioned myself so I could grab the door handle. So I grabbed the door handle, and as soon as I did, Vic, this thing started really, really, like, grabbing the handle on the other side and trying to lift up and lift up and lift up. I mean, you could tell it was like a battle between me and this thing, and it started to growl again, and it was acting really, really ugly. I was holding on to that door with dear life, even though from what I've seen so far, there's no way if it got the door open, I was going to be able to hold the door. But I wasn't just going to let it come into the car either. So I'm holding on to the door, and now things are getting ridiculous again. Jill's screaming and crying, and at this point, I'm starting to get really upset, and I'm beginning to lose it, and this thing's growling, and the smell from it, and I mean, it was just too much, and I was telling Jill to shut up at this point and just be quiet, because she was making it worse, but she was just hysterical, and I just lost it. I started screaming and crying myself, and then I started yelling at it to just quit and leave us alone and go away, and Jill started yelling for it to quit and leave us alone and go away. Believe it or not, all of a sudden, everything just quit. Dead silent. It quit pulling at the door, and everything just stopped. We sat there, not even a minute, and Jill was like, do you think it's gone? Even though we hadn't heard it run away, I didn't know if it was gone or not. I was like, I don't know, because we had been crying, so we couldn't really tell if it ran away. If so, we hadn't heard it. I was like, I don't know. we were listening for like sniffing or breathing or anything, and we just couldn't hear anything. About another minute passed, and I realized what I was going to have to do is I was going to have to, again, reach up and try to see out the window to see if it had left. And I was really dreading that. I really did not want to look out that window. But I repositioned myself because I was far enough down in the floorboard that you wouldn't have been able to see my body without putting your face up to the glass and looking in and looking down. Well, anyway, I positioned myself, and I remember my hand was really numb from holding onto the door, and I could barely use it. It was almost asleep. But I turned myself, and I just swiped a little place away from the window again, and then I was going to have to peek my head up just to look out that window. Well, I real slowly went up to that little spot and just looked out of it. And when I lifted myself up high enough to look out, to my ultimate horror, I am now looking into the eyes of two of the deadliest eyes I have ever in my life seen. I was looking at a monster. It had yellowish ember eyes. It was huge. It was much bigger than what I thought it was. And I'm not really good at weights or anything, but I think I'd originally told you I thought this thing was 300 or 400 pounds. But when you think muscle mass and the fact that I was thinking this thing was 7 to 8 foot tall, I would bet this thing weighed 600 or more pounds. I'm telling you, its head was the size of a grizzly, and I'm not joking. It was enormous. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. To this day, I find it hard to tell you the fear that run through me. Because this thing was not supposed to exist. This was a monster. It had a really kind of like shepherd-like snout. It was dark. It was black. Around its muzzle and its eyes, it was starting to get little pieces of gray, almost like maybe it was aging. It had tall ears, and it had hair coming out, like little tufts of hair coming out from its ears, the inside of its ears, and on the points, almost like you see a bobcat, and they have those long little tufts. Well, that's what was coming out. I was so close to it, Vic, I could see it had scars. It had a scar all the way across its snout, and then it had another scar across its right eye. So I don't know if it got those scars perhaps killing something or perhaps fighting. I don't know. If they do run in packs, maybe it was fighting another pack member. I don't know. But when I say this thing was huge, it was huge. And I mean huge. And it was just looking at me. And you almost felt like it was just looking through you. And I remember, I remember in my mind, I was sitting there thinking, no, this can't be real. This is a mythical creature that isn't supposed to exist, something that Hollywood made up. And I was sitting there, and the only word I could find for it in my mind was, I was looking at a werewolf. I was face to face with a werewolf on the other side of the glass. And as you see, I still, to this day, when I look back, I just get totally speechless, sitting here thinking about that thing and looking at it. You just, I can't wrap my mind. I mean, I know it exists, but it's still, I cannot believe they're out there. And they are. They're real. And I was looking at one. We probably honestly didn't look at each other that long because all of a sudden the animal, it looked down the road, like from where the guys should be coming. And that's when I realized, oh my God, the guys are going to be coming back any minute, and they're out there with this monster. And I realized this thing was probably going to kill my friends, and we were going to have to listen, or worse, watch it kill them, and then it was going to come back for us. And I just lost it again. I started to cry. I didn't know what to do because I didn't know how to warn them. There was nothing I could do to help them. And I remember when it did this, I got a really good kind of side view of it when it looked, and it only did it for a quick second, but when it looked down the road and then it snapped its head back at me, it gave me a really nasty kind of growl, and it just showed me its teeth, and it had these huge ivory teeth. I'll never forget that. Just kind of like, it didn't sneer at me, but just like, you know, a warning, like when a dog growls at you, like warning you, like, you know, don't mess with me. That's kind of what it did, but it snapped its head back my way, gave me that growl. I got to see its teeth, and then all of a sudden, it just shot off in the other direction. I was floored. I couldn't believe it. It was gone. And when I say this thing was fast, this thing was lightning fast. It was gone in an instant. I only got to see it. It ran off on all fours. I got to see that it kind of, I say the buffalo slump, but I guess most people call it hyena, but it was kind of shaped that way from the side. Its back and neck and shoulders were like, I don't know, built up like a hump almost. I didn't see a tail. I don't think it had a tail that I could tell, but I didn't really get to see the rear end of it really good, but I did get to see there for just a minute, or just a second, really, not even a minute, before it shot off. But it dove off, and it was back in the wood line, and it was gone, and it was probably, I don't know, a minute or less. We heard the guys. We saw flashlight beams. We heard them laughing and talking, and they were back. We were, of course, hysterical. We're so scared. In fact, they had to knock on the window, and once they were in the car, I remember locking my door and then jumping across my boyfriend and locking his. And I remember Jill's boyfriend was like, "What's wrong with you? Why are you crying?" And then my boyfriend was looking at me going, "Why are you crying? What happened?" They wanted to know what was happening. And then we all heard this horrible, horrible howl. I can't even describe it to this day, but it was just like when it growled at me the first time. It was just something that I'll never forget. And when we heard that howl, Jill and I were like, just get us the out of here and get us home. And I remember my boyfriend, he kind of bucked me for a minute and was like, "Oh, we're not going nowhere until you tell us what happened." And I remember I reached across him and I was trying to crank the car, and I screamed at him that I wanted to leave, that we had to go right now. I said it forceful enough, and I was crying and upset that even though he was mad, he fired the car up and he sped out of there, which I can't tell you how happy I was, because I didn't care if he was mad or not. I was just getting away from that horrible nightmare that we had just encountered. But the guys were pretty mad. We wanted to go home right away. And, of course, they didn't like that idea very much. But we did go home. And I remember when I got home, I had to run across my yard. My yard's really big. And I remember how scared I was. And I remember getting into the house and getting underneath the covers and just shivering and shaking and crying still. I was still upset. And I remember getting up and looking out my window probably a million times that night, just for anything in the darkness. I was just so scared. We had tried to tell our boyfriends on the ride home what had happened, but we were so upset. I don't think they really understood half of what we were saying, and they were mad too. I doubt they were listening much because they were mad that we wanted to go home. But the next day, my boyfriend stopped by. And when he stopped by to show me that on the top of his car in the dust, because like I said, we'd been on dirt roads that night. In the dust, though, there was handprints where this thing had grabbed right at the roof and window on the front and the back of his car. So that right there tells you just how far-reaching just its arm spread was. And undoubtedly it was grabbing it right there where I thought it was, shaking the car back and forth. And then right down his driver's side in the front, left quarter panel, all the way to the door was deep, deep claw marks. Not scratches, claw marks. Deep enough that he had to have it repainted. And like I said, we talked about it. They believed us at that point. We talked about it, never talked about it again. Because we later found out, too, the reason it sounds like a long time, but really all of this, him leaving and everything, the whole encounter with the creature was probably 10 to 12 minutes. And he was probably gone 20, 25, and the reason he was gone so long is Kim's boyfriend, they had something bothering their horses and had some cattle killed. And we all agreed that what they thought was killing cattle was not killing the cattle, that it was probably this thing. So that's what happened to me that night. I will never in my life forget it.
Cliff Humphreys, episode 84.
Yeah, I've been hunting all my life. And one morning, I decided to go over here across the street from my mother and daddy's place. It's a pretty good section of woods. And I've been going out there ever since I was about 6 with my dad. And I was just going out there to shoot some deer. And anyway, as soon as I got over in the woods, I noticed, and this has happened to me 4 or 5 times before. It's kind of strange. I got over there, and it was totally quiet. Like, not even a cricket. Nothing, like the woods were void of life. It's a strange thing, and I'm sure if anybody's done much hunting, if they've done a pretty good bit of hunting, they may have seen this in their lifetime. But anyway, I decided I was going to go on and go to my normal spot. And I slipped most of the time. I sneak and take my time. I rarely hunt out of a tree stand. Sometimes I do, but my favorite way to hunt deer is on the ground. And I'm slipping, and there's a creek that runs through there and cuts through and joins an adjacent property. And I'm slipping through there, and there's 2 huge cedar trees that's over there. And when I mean big, I mean they were probably 5 to 6 feet thick at the base. Well, both of them, they've been over there ever since I can remember. But both of them had fallen, and I had slipped up to one of them there and was slipping down the edge of it. That's just the way I hunt. And I caught a whiff of something I've never smelled before. So I stood there, and I'm trying to figure out the wind direction. And not much wind blowing at all. So I kneel down, and I'm trying to find the source of what that smell is. And all of a sudden I hear this low, guttural, like growl, kind of like a, I don't know, like a cat or something. Like I hear this just low, guttural moaning. And I can tell this, I'm beside this big cedar tree. The other cedar tree is about 15 foot on the other side of this one that I'm talking about. They're laying perfectly parallel to each other. Like I say, about 5.5 foot off the ground. So I'm knelt down, kind of leaning myself up on some pines there. And all of a sudden, it stands up and just goes back to me, totally black and massive built, I mean, basically like a bodybuilder. And in my mind, I knew what I was looking at, but I'm sitting there questioning what I'm looking at, because there's no black bear or anything like it. I knew that's not what it was. And about that time, there's a swamp rabbit about 6, 7 feet away from me to my left that took off. And they make a certain sound when they're spooked. I don't know if other people, I'm sure other people have heard this. But it took off running. When it did, that's when he turned around, and that's when I got Give me a second here. Anyway, he had turned around, and that's when I got a good look at him. And I mean, he's not 20 feet from me. Max 20 feet. And when he turned at the sound of that rabbit taking off, that's when he spotted me. And that's when I raised my weapon, because he laid his ears back, and me growing up around horses and stuff, I know what that gesture means. And as soon as he laid his ears back, that's when I raised my 7-mag out of 7-mag. And that's when I raised up, and I was fixing to shoot him in the face, and he took one leap and cleared, I don't know, 30, 40 feet, kind of straight away from me. And when he hit the ground, he turned to my right and took off in a speed that I've never seen of anything. And it run around to my right and disappeared into a little small thicket there. And I'm sitting waiting on him to come out the other side. And he never did. It's like the thicket wasn't very big either. It was like he run into nothing and just disappeared. It was on up behind. It was directly behind that cedar tree. And I don't know what it was doing. I didn't even care to even go look after that. I backed my way out of there, questioning many things. Because what I had just seen ain't supposed to be real. But it is, I assure you. Very real.
Mike and Mary, episodes 86 and 87.
We had been watching TV, and we were sitting on the couch, and we decided that it was time for bed. Mike had walked into the kitchen to put up his coffee cup, and I was going to lock the door, and I just grabbed the knob and was just getting ready to turn it, and there was a huge force behind it. I mean, it just caught me off guard, and I just kind of shoved really quick, and there's like linoleum right in front of our door. I was wearing socks. Whatever hit that door hit with such force that it was pushing me back. I yelled to Mike. I was like, I need your help. I can't hold this door. I can't shut it. He came running around the corner and hit the door with all his weight, and we were able to finally latch the door, but there was something on the other side hitting with force. It's enough to put chills down your spine forever. I mean, that was a scary, scary night. There was no doubt about it. Something was trying to come in.
After the door was closed, I grabbed my pistol. I'll go ahead and backtrack a little bit. An hour and a half prior, we had been watching TV, and we noticed there was a loud thumping sound on our back deck. And after living here for all these years, Mary and I were both like, here we go again. You know, there's something out here. I had actually went to the bedroom and pulled out my Glock and set it on the table by our couch. It was still in its box, but I thought, well, if something does happen, at least it's nearby and it's accessible, and having it nearby was a better peace of mind for both of us. We didn't hear anything else rest that night. Before that, it got quiet, but it felt better having it. And knowing the way things had happened out here before, we weren't going to take any chances. And that night when something did hit our door the same night, it was an hour and a half later. Like Mary said, I was in the kitchen, and she looks right at me with this, I mean, just the look on her face was, help me, help me. I just made a beeline for it. I'm 6'2", and I weigh 315 pounds, and I work out quite a bit. So, I mean, I just put all my force behind that door, and with my foot against the door, I leaned over, grabbed the firearm, and I told Mary, I said, if this keeps up, I'm going to fire right through this door. I'm not taking any more chances with this thing. That's when I noticed that the screen door was actually shutting. And that really sent a really massive chill up both our spines, because it was a matter of, okay, we're not imagining this. This is real. The screen door just shut, because we could see it through our other door, through our main door. The really scary part was, okay, whatever it was has backed off, but where to go? Is it going to be standing in our yard when I open this door? Where's it going to be? But I went on ahead and opened the door, had my firearm ready in case something did happen. I walked down the steps, and our dog, he was in his house. He was not going to come out at all. I couldn't have bribed him for all the kibble in the world for him to come out at that point. I walked over there, on the west side of the house, and that's when I heard a crashing sound of limbs and branches breaking, like something had, after it pushed the door and we had started pushing back, it's almost like it jumped off the side of the porch and quickly went around the west side of the house and just made a beeline for the wooded area in our back part of the house. The first incident probably was around 2011 on our back deck. We had actually been hearing something that night, too. It was around wintertime, and we actually were watching TV, and we just heard a click, 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 click sound. We both turned around and looked, and the doorknob was actually jiggling. We couldn't actually see through the window because whatever it was, the light was actually off in our laundry room that leads up to the back deck. But, I mean, something was obviously standing there that was very dark. We couldn't really see anything, though, but what we did see was actually the doorknob being jiggled. One of our neighbors that lives on the other side, her house is actually about, I want to say, probably about a half a mile away if you go west of us, but in the same complex. Her niece is someone that I knew. So I stopped one day and said hi to her, and, you know, it's another one of those things where I just asked her, has your aunt ever seen anything weird that has taken place in this area? Her aunt lives alone. With anybody that lives out here by themselves, I can imagine if they've seen something, how much more alone that they feel. But she actually did say one night she saw something walk by her bay window out of the corner of her eye, and her back door actually started doing the same thing. It was jiggling. And she had said that what her aunt told her was that she had heard a snarl from behind that door. She's a tribal member, too, and we had actually discussed, well, what do you think it is? And she had said, well, she doesn't know, but she's open to the idea that whatever this was not a human at all and was probably into the realm of what lurks in the shadows. The hill, it's actually a place where my great-grandfather, he built a house out there with my great-grandmother. I believe when the house was built, it was probably around 1910, but they had actually settled that property probably around the late 1800s. My great-grandmother, she had numerous kids. Of course, their kids had kids, and it was a big family that we have. But the hill was actually more of a place where once a year, family get-together, stuff like that. It's actually a very high point in the county where my parents live. It's probably, I'm going to say, around about a mile from where my parents live. And between there and my parents' house is real thick woods. There's a trail that actually leads to it. And I remember being a kid and walking that trail when you're a kid. You could get away with walking the backwoods, it seemed like 30 years ago. But a lot of that changed, though, in 1983. It was during the summertime. Bear in mind, this accounts from family members that do recall what happened. A couple of them have passed on since then. But one night, my great-uncle, they used to call him Big John, was on his porch one night, and he heard this really, really loud roaring sound, and it came from his garden. He gets up, he's looking down there, and, well, of course, I'm sure at that time he was probably sit there kind of bewildered as to what in the world is that. Well, not even 10 minutes later, where my parents live, my grandfather, he had heard the same thing. When my grandfather went outside to go listen, he could hear something thrashing in the woods, like it was going through busted branches, and they all agreed that what they had smelled was something that smelled like a river bottom almost. I mean, just a really bad stench and a loud roaring sound. It never stopped either. I mean, they could hear it walking around all night long, just about. My grandfather, he had went back inside. He had gotten his rifle out. The way my grandfather had told me himself before he passed, because I had asked him a few times about it, and when this went on, I was just still a little kid. But what he had told me is when he had actually walked down to the fence line where the wood started, he goes, you know, I've been in World War II. I've been shot. I've seen combat. I've seen friends die. I've seen the worst of the worst and what it was like over there. And he goes, when I came back, I didn't have any fear of anything. Nothing scared me. He goes, but once I walked to that fence line and I looked into the darkness, even though I did have a weapon on me, I was chilled all the way to the bone. And because I can't even describe the amount of fear I had when I heard it growling, knowing this was something that can be explained. I believe it was probably around 8 or 9 of my family members and friends of the family that actually heard this thing on a nightly basis. This went on for probably around, I would say, a week. When this started happening, though, word got around a little bit, but I think a lot of people didn't believe that something was actually going around that was that loud and couldn't be explained. My mom had said, you knew when it was coming because before the roaring would even start, she goes, you could smell the river bottom, and it smelled like a combination of wet dog, river bottom, and something like rotted meat. And she goes, it had the most terrible stench that you could imagine. You could hear it growling. She goes, it would send shivers down your spine. It got to a point where every night they would dread when nightfall would come in because it was a matter of, we have to deal with this again. A lot of the family members and a lot of people that are from the tribe, they come up there, and at that time they had camp houses out there where each family, they had a house built, and whenever they would have church services on Sunday nights, some of them who drove from miles away could stay in the houses, or if they decided that they just wanted a place to stay, that was a place where they could. One of the elders from the tribe, she was staying in one of those camp houses, but around the same time when this was going on, she had actually made her way to one of the outhouses. This was probably around, I'd say from the camp house to the outhouse, I want to say it was probably about 50 yards away. Of course, in the dark, it's even scarier. She had actually was in the outhouse and heard it, and she could hear it walking. What she described was its breathing was very labored. It was very big, and she didn't dare look out. I think she had probably stayed in there for maybe 2 hours until I think somebody had come looking for her going, what are you still doing down there? But the church wrote to my parents, it's probably around, I would say that's about maybe less than a half a mile away. But that same area, I mean, it's a very open area. Throughout the years, some of the camp houses have been torn down. But when she said that she had heard that and it got quiet again, she walked out of the outhouse and made her way back to the place where she was staying. Some of the people that were with her were sitting there going, why were you gone for so long? Well, later on that night, I forgot about this. They were sleeping, and where the yard light was for the church, they had actually seen something massive walking that blocked the light out that walks by the window. They could not explain what they were seeing, but all of a sudden, maybe not even 20 seconds later, the roaring started again behind their house on the church property. That night, my mom had said that she could hear it there, too. It really kind of baffled them because they're sitting there going, why is it on this side of the church property now? I mean, it's never gone up there before, until they realized that there were some people staying up there. I mean, it was almost like whatever it was had the sole purpose of terrifying everybody that lived within that area for a week straight. We had been watching the movie that night, and I believe the next day we were off work, so it was just a matter of us relaxing on the couch and just watching the movie, and before we knew it, we had both just fell asleep. When we had fallen asleep, we had actually left our curtains open. At that time, we still hadn't had our yard light put up yet. You could see on one part where our porch light hit, but on the other side where our curtains were open, it was just pitch black. Mary and I had been asleep for maybe 30 minutes. Something startled me. I mean, I woke up, and something just didn't feel right. I just thought, okay, well, I'm going to wake Mary up, and we're just going to head on to bed. I didn't turn my head, but I kind of shifted my eyes over to where the curtains were open, and that's when I saw two yellow eyes looking directly in our house, and the head, I didn't see the ears this time because it was still dark, but there was darkness, and in the center of all that darkness where our window was open was the biggest snout I had ever seen. It was really, really big. Its eyes were looking right at me. I was trying not to freeze. I remember thinking to myself, okay, well, I'm just going to pretend like I'm not seeing it. I'm just going to nudge Mary and say, let's go to bed. I had tapped her, and she woke up and looked at me. We had actually made eye contact, and I kind of motioned with my eyes, look at the window. I had actually told her, well, I'm going to go get the box and put it up so we can go to bed, which that was just basically, I was just trying to think of something where it sounded at least somewhat normal, which I hope she was going to read as I'm going to go get the gun. I'll be right back. I had actually stepped in the bedroom and grabbed it, and when I was walking back, it actually was still pressed up against the screen, looking at us. I'll never forget as yellow as the eyes were, and we never saw any teeth, but it was almost like its face was pressed against the screen and was almost like trying to get a scent of our house. I looked at Mary and I said, okay, I'm going to go out the back deck and I'm going to flank it. I pull out my firearm and hit the back deck real quick. I'm walking across, and as I'm doing it, Mary said that all of a sudden what we had both seen in the window was no longer there, but she had heard something heavy running. I'll let Mary kind of describe the running part.
He went out on the back deck, and it was just a few seconds after he was out there. I don't think he'd even made it to the steps yet, and I could hear just something out in that dirt. Right between our trees, we'd had a lot of erosion, and so there was a lot of grass missing, and something had been out in that dirt just moving quickly. And when it got over towards our cars, that's all gravel, you could hear it crunching, and it just tore off into the woods. I mean, he probably maybe missed it by 10 seconds, 20 seconds. I mean, it was a lot quicker than he was. And as soon as it hit the woods, the blackness it swallowed it up. There was just nothing to be seen.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have stopped 10 feet inside the woods and been standing there watching us, and we wouldn't have had any idea. None. I came home, and our road that we come off the pavement kind of tees off, and we take a right turn, and right when your lights hit, that's the beginning of our property. I turned on, and I seen the tail end of our dog in the front yard. He was kind of up against the tree, kind of if you've ever seen a dog like tree a cat or tree a raccoon. They'll stand up against the tree and bark at it and keep it from coming down. And I thought, okay, he's got the neighbor cat up there. He chased the raccoon up the tree, and he's proud of it. Looking back, I was really dumb. I had pulled up against the edge of the road right on the ditch, and I stopped my car and rolled down the window, and I'm talking to this dog, hey, buddy, what are you doing? And kind of seeing, just the tail didn't wag, but there was the tail was there, and our dog was, really dark black. And I thought, okay, he's really excited, but he didn't make really any noise. He just stood there up against this tree. I had talked to him for about 30 or 40 seconds and really wasn't getting a response from him. And so I had decided to just go ahead and park and go get a flashlight and see what he's gotten up in that tree. I went to the driveway and pulled in and rolled up my windows and shut off the car and grabbed all my stuff and was walking towards the house. And at that point, we still didn't have a street light, and so the only light was coming off the front porch steps. I remember walking up, talking to him still, like you're a goofy dog, you're still over there messing with whatever's in the tree, jumping around. By this point, he's normally happy and excited to see me, and it wasn't anything like that. It was just really strange. When I got up closer to the house, I just noticed that I couldn't see his face. He was like, I guess the best way to describe it is if I was standing up against a tree and kind of had my head down against my shoulder would be the best way to describe it. It was like he was up on the tree but not looking up. It was almost like he was hiding his face from me. And I just thought, why would my dog act this way? Well, I'd gotten 2 steps up. I think I was just going to the 3rd step. I think we have 4 or 5 steps up to our level. I'd gotten to like the 3rd step, and I just got this horrible chill. I mean, just goosebumps, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, and it was just like something's wrong. Something is so wrong right now. And I was like just scared, instantly scared. And I thought, okay, I've got the keys in my hand. Something's not right. The best thing I need to do is get in the house. And I remember going up the steps rather quickly and opening up our screen door, and I heard our dog, and I thought, well, finally he's going to talk. He's going to say something. I'm going to hear a bark, a whimper, a whine. But it wasn't coming from the tree. It was coming from the other side of the house. Where our front door is, The next room is our bedroom, and right around the corner of our bedroom was where our dog was coming from. He came out, and I could just see him in the light of the steps. He had his tail tucked. He was really quiet. He wasn't barking or happy to see me in any sort. He looked very, very, very nervous, very, very afraid. And he kept looking towards the tree. And I thought, at that moment in time, it just dawned on me, whatever I've been talking to, whatever I've been trying to get to come, and pay me some mind, wasn't our dog at all. It was the scariest feeling. I mean, it was just, I was so stupid. I remember just telling him to go in his dog's house and opening up the door really quick, latching it, making sure the screen door was locked and the door was locked. I think I threw something up against the door, and I was just sitting there thinking, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm so lucky to be in the house at this moment. And all it kept flashing before me was how much smaller my dog was than what I'd been talking to. And when I started really picturing it, my dog didn't have a bushy tail. He was a black lab pit bull cross, and he was really black. This thing was kind of scruffy looking and 4 times the size of my dog. I thought the biggerness of what he was, I thought was shadow. I never took into consideration it was something so much bigger that wasn't our dog at all until I was in the house, saying with this little prayer of, thank God I'm still here. I don't think I ever want to go outside again. And I remember just waiting until Mike had gotten home to tell him, we're getting a street light, we're buying more guns, we need more dogs. That was just too close.
Oh, I'd say it was. Thank goodness it didn't turn out any worse than it did.
Yeah, absolutely. That, like you said, once you've seen something like that, you definitely know that nightmares are real. You really can't unsee those things. They're there forever. I really do wish I could unsee it.
Saturday night, I was pulling out of the driveway. Mary was at work still, and I was going to go pick her up. Our truck's broken down, and I was in our SUV. It was a fairly dark night. I mean, the time change hadn't happened, so it was pitch black outside. When I pulled out, I had to take our road a little bit slow because of the gravel, and they've been doing some work on our roads during the daytime, and so the gravel is a little bit slippery anyway. I mean, it's just very loose. Well, I had actually drove about 150 yards on our road and was making a turn. I had my dims on, and my lights actually hit something as I was turning. I locked eyes with it. It was in our neighbor's yard, but in the area where it was standing, it was kind of where a gully is. So where it was standing, it must have been, I'm going to say probably at least, at the very least, 6'3", and I'm willing to bet probably more like 6'6" in height. Very bulky shoulders. It was like a very dark gray color. What really got me with this was how it was standing. Its arms were very bulky too, and it was like it was in a position where its back was not so much hunched over, but almost like it was, like it didn't really even care that I saw it. That was what really got me, was it was standing right there looking directly at the SUV. And by the time I had actually got a good view of it, I was already turning, and with it being on gravel, I had already actually picked up the pace, and I really didn't want to turn around and go looking, to be honest with you. It was in our neighbor's yard. They weren't home. I know that I saw what I saw. Its ears were pointy, and just the way it looked was very, almost territorial, like it was establishing its territory. I mean, I've never seen something like that before, and I know we'll get to it later, but it's definitely not what I saw last summer. But this was, I really can't even describe how I felt when I saw it, because just how menacing it looked. I mean, there was nothing nice about it. There was nothing, this was pure primal. At the same time, territorial, establishing an alpha dominance. And it just happened to be the one night I didn't have my firearm with me. I decided to leave it at home when I left the house. So that was another reason. And another reason why I didn't really want to turn around and go back is I don't think our insurance would cover being attacked by a dog man and explaining what happened to our SUV. This is actually something my cousin, I mean, even to this day, he and I both even said, we can't explain what happened that night. It was a summer night. I want to say it was probably maybe around July. This was areas that I used to go tracing through, and even at nighttime, there was nothing really ominous about it until that night, actually. We were just out and about, hanging out that night at my parents' house, and we decided to go walking down the road. I want to say this was around 11:30 at night. We were in the field, and we were actually walking toward the dirt road. Once we hit the dirt road, across that from there, from the field, was another pasture, and it was a cattle pasture. Well, the owner of that area, it had probably been maybe 2 or 3 years since he had had any cattle on it. So, I mean, the grass was really high anyway, and from where we were standing, you couldn't even see into the cattle pasture, mostly because there was some high weeds and a couple of trees that were by the fence. So to really even get a good look over there, it was almost impossible. We were standing there talking, kind of just strolling along, and all of a sudden, we had thought we heard movement. We both stopped, and my cousin actually heard it first. He goes, "What was that?" I stopped, and we both listened, and probably maybe 5 seconds later, we heard a snarl. It was the most eeriest snarl I'd ever heard. It was more like a sound. My cousin actually took off running, and I'm sitting there going, "Whoa, wait up." All that training, all the fight training, being combat ready, that kind of went out the window briefly because you just don't hear something like that. It definitely wasn't a dog. This was way too big to be a dog, as deep as it sounded. Now, I caught up with my cousin. We basically ran into the light, and my cousin goes, "You heard that too, right?" And I'm sitting there going, "Yeah, please tell me you heard the same thing I did." And no more than probably 10 seconds later, we heard it again. This time it was a loud snarl, and it lasted for probably 3 seconds of a deep guttural growl. What freaked me out is I know that from where I was standing, when I heard that snarl, if I would have reached out and took maybe 2 steps over and reached into the dark, I would have touched whatever it was because it was that close. It really freaked us out that night. The place where we heard it is what we had talked about regarding the hill. I mean, it was the same property where my parents live. It's about 40 minutes from where our house is here. Hearing that, it really just freaked us out to the point where we couldn't explain what we had heard and why it was still standing there when we had ran off, and it emphasized, "I'm still here, and you did hear me."
Yeah, we had decided we were going to go to bed. I went to switch the laundry in the laundry room, right off the living room, from the washer to the dryer. My kid went off to bed, and I'd made one trip into the living room with some clothes and was going to fold them in the morning, and I went back into the laundry room. It was really windy. It was real cold. We'd had a really almost freakish thunderstorm that winter, and it was just real loud, lots of thunder, lots of lightning. It was just pouring, really, really, really heavy. I'd gotten the last load of laundry and put into the dryer, and it just started the dryer up when I just heard this incredible roar. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just like a roar. It was the cross between like a guttural growl, something really, really deep, and frustration. It was like something was incredibly pissed off, but at the same time, very, very much frustrated. It scared me. I jumped right into the washer and just kind of made a big bang and then like hit the door as I was running out to find Mike. And it was like, "You're never going to believe what I just heard." And he was like, "There's no way you didn't just hear that." Well, I walked back out there when he's getting up from, he's already in bed. I'm walking back out there to just kind of pinpoint exactly where I heard it. And right when the thunder was, it was just a big loud boom, I heard one more, you couldn't call it a howl. It was more like, almost like a mournful growl. But I mean, just shivers right down my spine. I don't think I slept the entire night. It was just, it sounded like it was mere feet on the other side of the wall.
Dave Leidy, episode 95.
Back in 2009, it was in October. I remember the date very well. It was my 49th birthday. My wife Lisa and I were very fond of camping, and ever since we met, we have camped just about everywhere east of the Mississippi that has a national forest or a nice state park. We decided that since tent camping was a game for younger bones, we entered into the realm of travel trailers. After looking at many, we decided upon an Airstream. They are really nice and on the expensive side, but we intended to get a lot of use out of it. We got a 25-footer so that we could fit into just about any campground. It has full hookups, but we never really used anything but the electric, and hardly that. Plus, we installed solar panels because we intended to dry camp 100% of the time. I traded in my 250 and bought an F350 because we wanted a little more power towing the trailer. It's an old joke among Airstream owners that you have a $60,000 trailer pulled by a $50,000 truck looking for a free campsite. So, well, as I said, we were older now and we had more resources and decided to go that way. So we embarked on a tour of the East Coast National and State Parks that year, and we would sometimes stay for a week or two in a place, and sometimes we'd spend just a day or two moving around. And sometimes we didn't even unhook the trailer. We just pulled it around with us to use it as a resource. We both have a lot of outdoor experience. I was a Boy Scout and spent a lot of time hiking and camping, either with friends or alone. And I was pretty aware of strange things in the wilds, especially at night, but sometimes in the daylight. I had said that there were some weird places that I had visited. Most were pretty normal, but like I said, the Daniel Webster Forest in Vermont, Pine Barrens in New Jersey, just to name two, were pretty strange. Well, with my wife, we experienced nothing really that strange together, but one particular time, we decided to go to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We had no plan, so we just kind of wung it. And we traveled slowly as usual, staying at campgrounds along the way, though usually state parks, as they seem to be a bit quieter. So we made our way south, and we steered toward the coast. Now, we crossed into North Carolina from Virginia, and we saw that it was getting close to dusk, and we picked out the closest state park, which happened to be Pettigrew State Park near the Picassen Lakes National Wildlife Refuge near Phelps Lake. As it got dark, we passed through a couple of dark towns, and a few miles from the park, we passed through a town called Cresswell. And this was pretty dark, too. I was surprised that there weren't any lights in town. So I stopped along the road. I uncovered my off-road lights so we could see better, and we continued on. Around a corner, when we came into town, there was this big house, and as we approached, we saw about 15 people in the yard, and it was pitch dark. And before my lights came around to the scene, it must have been really dark there, and we looked at each other and thought, well, why would you hang out in the dark like that? But as we went by, they all stopped and stared at us. We went by and gave us a weird feeling, too. And as I went by, the last guy on the lawn looked at me and said, "Good luck." I thought, oh, no. Yeah, that's not good. So we got our way down to Pettigrew, and we got there just as the park ranger was leaving. And there was only one other camper there, and they were talking together. The place was kind of wet. It had rained a bit. There weren't many trees except by the lake. It was just kind of swampy. And we asked what it was like there, and the ranger looked at the other guy, and he looked around. He was kind of nervous, and he said, "Okay, pretty good. I promise to be back at sunrise." And he seemed pretty nervous, and the other guy seemed pretty nervous, and we looked at each other and said, "Oh, maybe we'll give this one a miss." And the other guy said, "Well, you're not staying?" "Well, neither am I. I'm not staying another night." And he got back and started breaking camp. We're thinking, well, that's kind of weird. So maybe it was the right decision. So we left there, and we drove toward Roanoke Island, because we figured, well, since we're so far away from really any state park or where we're going to go, maybe we'll stay in a store parking lot. We often do that. Since there were no other parks nearby and all that, so we're not going to boondock in the swamp, so we're going to try for something in civilization. So we headed down Route 94 and crossed the Alligator River and drove into the middle of the Alligator National Park. So that, again, having lived in Pennsylvania my whole life and camping mostly in the north, The thought of large man-eating lizards were kind of new to me, and I felt a little uneasy just at the reality of that type of predator. So we drove through the night, and we were looking up the park on our phones, and we read about this red wolf. It was a critically endangered species that was reintroduced to the park a few years ago, and no one had seen it in a while. And we were almost to Man's Harbor, which is right on the bridge over to the island, and we saw this dog walking toward us, and we looked at each other, and boy, didn't it look just like a red wolf? And we had just read about that, and it was just so amazing. So I'd say it was about 1 a.m., and we're almost to the ocean, probably about 10 miles out. Driving along, and I hear this loud thunk on the trailer. And I thought, what a place. I really didn't want to get out here. But I decided I should go take a look. So I stopped, and I left the truck running. And I grabbed my .357, holstered it, and walked out. And I went out, and I checked the truck, and I checked the trailer. And I didn't see anything obviously wrong. Well, maybe I just ran over a branch or something. And then I saw a dent in the trailer just below the right taillight. Well, I checked it, and while I was looking at it, the hair on the back of my neck stood straight out, and all the insect noises stopped. And I knew about that feeling, having had that feeling before. And I got a little nervous. I kind of knew that there was something near me, either staring at me or in the area, and something odd. It was kind of like a predator feeling, like a mountain lion, coyote feeling. You know what that is. So I slowly turned around, and I didn't see anything at first. And the feeling got stronger, rather uncomfortable. So I pulled the gun out. I still didn't see anything, but I started to hear some rustling and water noises. And so I focused in the direction of that, and I saw a dark shape behind some scrub bushes. And as my sight sharpened, I saw a familiar shape. It looked like I was looking right at one of my German Shepherds. But this one was reddish black. It was very large. And it had very large ears with looked like tufts of hair sticking up. And they were both facing me like little radar dishes. And it had its front paws on a rock, and it was crouching behind the rock. And I noticed that one of the ears was light gray and bent over a little bit. It looked very out of place for this guy who was pretty much consistently dark everywhere else. So our eyes met, that eyes met feeling again like the one I had had before, but this time it wasn't very pleasant. I got a chill. And what I was looking at, I thought, was the look of a hunter, no emotion, and that kind of scared me. It looked to my left, its right, and moved a little bit forward. And then it did something that really haunts me to this day. I saw a deer do it once, thought it was crazy then. Well, it lurched back onto its rear legs, and then there were these two distinct popping sounds as it straightened up. Well, then I really saw him. He was somewhat muscular above the waist, with hair like a mane around his shoulders. His fur was reddish, though it was dark with black streaks. He had yellow predator eyes, which I can pretty much still see as well. Pointed ears, and his paws had fingers and claws on the end, and very long muscular arms. His lower half was thinner and kind of strange canine legs, and I thought I saw a short tail. I said, wow, this is the stuff of nightmares. I wondered if I was really seeing this thing. And then it made some noise. It was a low growling. And then it looked to its right again. I followed its gaze, and I saw another one. And this one was very dark. It was on all fours and moving to my left. And I thought, that looks like a flanking maneuver. I think it was time to go. And so the one in the front took another step, and he showed his teeth. And I could see them in the moonlight glinting at me. In fact, if I think about it, I can still see them. Well, I backed away toward my truck, and I glanced to my left again, and I still heard the other one, but I couldn't see him anymore. Well, that wasn't good. So I reached the truck backwards, and I saw that the first one had reached the road, and he had 1 foot or paw or whatever it was on the road. And I took aim at him, and I fired. I was pretty shaken up. So I'm a pretty good shot, and I was aiming at his head. But he moved at the last minute, and I'm sure that I hit him in the shoulder. It was he didn't react like I thought he would, getting hit with a gun of that caliber. It was almost like I punched him, nothing more. And I had the distinct feeling that I think I just made him mad. So, but he did stop, and the other one stopped. So I used that time to get in the truck. Honestly, I don't remember getting in the truck. My wife was in there in a state of panic because of the shot, and also because she had really never seen me frightened before, and she said I was shaking. I don't remember getting in. I don't remember putting the truck in gear. I don't remember taking off, but I was, and I was moving pretty well, and the truck was pretty powerful as it was, and always made light of the trailer load. So I looked in my mirrors, and I saw one on each side of the truck in the road, and at least another one behind each of them. And I thought, oh no, there's 4 of them. Well, they stayed with me up to about 30, 35 miles an hour. And then they slowed down, and they just veered back into the swamp and were gone. So I didn't stop or really talk until I crossed the bridge and got on the Roanoke. I pulled into the Menteo shopping center, and I stopped. Then I looked at Lisa, and I told her what I saw. And she said she didn't see anything, but she admitted she was looking at her phone when I was back there. Well, I'm really glad she didn't get out, or she didn't see them. I don't think I would have ever gotten her out of the house again. I decided not to go into too much detail because of that. And I just told her I fired a warning shot at a predator. So we were on Roanoke, and we stayed in a grocery store parking lot that night. A lot of businesses allow overnight stays by truckers and campers. They figure that you'll wake up and shop in the morning, and that's usually what happens. I know that Walmart and Cracker Barrel and places like that, they have special parking for trailers, and they just ask that you park so that the store cameras are toward your doors overnight. So we stayed there. We had a pretty uneventful night, except I had some really bad dreams about you-know-what. I kept seeing them really clearly in my dreams. And the thing that kept repeating in my dream, and like I said, it still bothers me, is when I think of them as the actual point in which they stand up. Maybe it's the popping sound. It's like an abnormal move, and they do it anyway. And the eyes, of course, just kind of glowing yellow. I'd seen predator eyes before, but these were different. So they seem to run faster and maybe quieter on 4 legs from what I saw. And they seem to shift effortlessly between 4 legs and like a half crouch. But from what I saw, they seemed to have to stop completely to stand completely up. At least the one in front of me did. So I woke up from that in a sweat. But we went into the grocery store in the morning, and of course everybody was staring at us, but that's not unusual. So we got our groceries, and we came back out, and we put them in the trailer. And Lisa got in her side, and I was walking around the trailer on my side, and I saw this truck in the parking lot in front of me, and the driver had me in a dead stare, and it was decidedly unfriendly. So there were several things I could have done at that point, so I decided to ask him what was up. And as soon as I started to talk, he completely fell apart and started apologizing to me. He said that I was a carbon copy of a friend of his, and he thought he was messing with him. And we laughed. And I asked him about the island and the surrounding area, and he told me that the normal tourist stuff and told me about a couple of good restaurants. So I looked at him, and I looked at the rifle rack in the back of his truck, and I decided to ask him about the swamp. When I told him that, he kind of rocked back on his heels and looked at me. He looked around, and he said that he thought he was the only one. Well, we proceeded to sit at the table in the camper and talk about it, and it seemed like he had exactly the same experience twice. His name was Eric. He described him right down to the bent gray ear on one of them. That was interesting. So he told me the first time he only saw one, but the second time he saw two, maybe three, and the second time he shot one. He said he hit it in the chest, and it didn't stop at all. And then he hit it in the leg, and it stopped and looked down. And then they all retreated. Maybe that's good to know. Eric said that they had displayed hunting behavior. He said that he saw them on the mainland when he was out there hunting, and he also said he doesn't go there anymore. In fact, he said that he used to hunt everywhere in and around the swamp, and it seemed to him that since this dogman thing has come around, he doesn't go hunting, and he doesn't see anybody else going hunting either, so we don't know. So I thought the same thing. I'd seen predators and all kinds of stuff my whole life being out there, but I never saw these guys. But then again, I never really looked for them either. You know, coyotes, bobcat, bear, mountain lion, gator, snakes, gator for him. We all knew them, but we never saw these before, and they were definitely different. He told me that a friend of his was a Bigfoot researcher, and he had been out with him a couple of times, and they said they had a pretty good time doing it, and they never really felt seriously in danger, but since they started seeing dogman, it's put a real damper on their things, and they seemed that it diminished their activities somewhat. So I bought them lunch, and the three of us enjoyed the lunch, and I didn't really mention it again. And then Lisa and I left, and we went to Fort Raleigh, the north end, and then we went down to Kill Devil Hills, weird name, and we checked out the Kitty Hawk First Flight area. And I started to put the whole thing out of my mind. You know, being in civilization is real good for that. We kept the trailer hooked up, and we acted like hermit crabs for a while out there and dragging the trailer around with us. So we stayed one more night at Menteo, and then we drove down to the Outer Banks, and we had a great time. It's a great place. We went between the seasons, and it was pretty quiet. So we drove as far as we could. The road ran out, and we settled down at this campground at the end called Frisco Woods. It was closed, but I called the owner, and he told me to stay as long as I wanted to, and that the electric was on, and that was cool. It was really a nice place. We unhooked the trailer and set up our camp, and we could see the bay and the ocean at the same time. I had a pretty good time, and I was wary of the alligators, of course, and I had the dogmen in the back of my mind, but didn't seem to be any predators on the Outer Banks. So we stayed for about a week, and we headed back. Unless you take a ferry, there's really only one way on and off of the islands. Right before we left the area, we dry camped and hooked up one more time. We were off of Roanoke and onto the mainland near Mans Harbor. And we stayed at a nameless business there on Ferry Dock Road. And we didn't really venture out after dark. Before we went in, the owner told us we should stay inside after midnight and didn't say anything else, so he didn't have to tell me. So in the middle of the night, I got up and decided to look outside. Never a good idea to look outside in the middle of the night, but I did it anyway because I thought I heard some stealthy movement outside. I didn't see anything. But I did, before I went back, thought I saw two eyes on the edge of the woods. And, of course, the insects stopped again. They're about maybe 4 or 6 feet off the ground, I could say, from where I was. I could have been wrong. But after a while, they were gone, and the noise started again. If it had been any other time, I would have dismissed it as totally normal. But since the events of the week before, I was really nervous now. So in the morning, we woke up, we thanked the guy, and we hit the road. There was no sign of the creature anywhere, and I was happy about that. Guy saw me looking around, and he looked at me, and he didn't say anything. And I started to say something, and he put his finger up to his mouth. I said, okay, I'm not going to say anything. So we were driving through, and right before, well, we left North Carolina. We took 64 to 32, and then we were in Virginia back by the Great Dismal Swamp, and we went to Suffolk, and eventually Norfolk. A few times I thought I saw some creatures running along the side with the truck, but that was probably my imagination. When I looked, they weren't there. But when I did, right before I left, I slowed down, and I stopped, and I looked back at the swamp, and I almost swear that I saw a dog man in the swamp watching me leave. Now, that didn't make me feel good either. So the experience has made me much more aware of my surroundings. I look over my shoulder a lot. I examine the woods thoroughly at all times. I guess that's good. I thought I was doing that, but I guess it wasn't. So I went about and I researched the phenomenon for a long time. It may seem that I may have opened myself up a little bit, but maybe I didn't. I mean, I must have been there all the time. So after a while, I got brave enough to tell my story to my two best friends, and they teased me a little bit, but they knew me well enough to know I was serious. One of them spends a lot of time outdoors, and his property backs up to a large wooded area on the outskirts of Lake Nockamixon, which is about 30 miles north of Philadelphia. And he started to tell me that he had some strange occurrences on his property. He said he wanted to tell me about it after I told him my story. He thought people would think he was crazy, but now he felt comfortable enough. His property is irregularly shaped in about 20 acres, I'd say. And as I said, it's attached to a large park surrounding a reservoir. The area's got a real long history. It's sacred to the tribe of Native Americans that live there. And there's a bunch of stone structures nearby in the lands, and there's a couple roads named after him. So he began to tell me that over the last month he started hearing strange noises at the back of his property. He didn't have a large fence, just enough to mark the property, and his dogs are actually pretty friendly, so the fence wasn't really meant for them. It's just to mark things out. So he was hearing snarling and baying in the back, like wild dogs. And in the back of his property, he had this shed that he used to process deer, and it was damaged. Somebody had broken into it, but it was scratched and clawed and torn up, and he didn't think that was human damage. So he had repaired it, but something broke in again. So he decided to watch the house with binoculars and see what was disturbing the shed. He thought it might be a bear, but there's no bear in the county. I guess it's not unheard of, but there wasn't. So he started watching, and one night the surrounding forest, of course, got quiet, just that whole thing, and his dogs, who are usually very alert, put their heads down, put their tails between their legs, and ran down the basement. He said, uh-oh. So he was watching the shed with binoculars, and he thought he saw a shadow move. And as he watched, he swore that he saw a wolf-like creature, his words, walking on two legs. So he said he shook his head, and he said the sight scared him a bit, more than anything he'd remember. And he considered going out with a shotgun, but he thought better of it. The next day he went out to the shed, and the dogs seemed pretty normally. Didn't see any damage, but he found some tracks. So he told me this story, and I went out to the house with him, and we looked at the shed. And there were people hiking around and stuff during the day, and everything seemed pretty normal. So that night we built a fire, and we sat in his backyard, and we were watching. And we didn't see anything, but there were a couple of times during the night that insects stopped, and there was that weird, eerie feeling like we were being watched. So I told him I had an idea. I told him to start processing his deer somewhere else. Kind of a pain, but if he was going to continue living there, I think that it might be better. So we cleaned the shed, wiped down with bleach solution, and repurposed it. And after that, the activity kind of stopped. I don't know whether they disappeared, but the activity stopped. We didn't feel it again. So I think he's pretty fortunate because in my heart when I had my encounter and what I saw. I think once they were there, they were going to stay. And I don't know, maybe they would follow you home. And that's a real sobering thought. It's strange how you can tell the difference between a Bigfoot, a predator, human, dogman. Each one has a completely different feeling, but the dogman to me holds like a kind of a terror feeling, like the alligator, but much worse. It's almost like an instinctual fear, but I never really saw it on the other two trips or on my friend's property, but my senses told me that it was the same feeling that I had in the Allegheny National Park. I have to say that I've had that feeling a couple times too, in rather small patches of woods, surprisingly near Philadelphia. That sounds really creepy, but when you know you're being watched, and I know the feeling now. So again, I'm hoping that you can follow me home. So we still love to go camping and be out in the woods, but I'm always very wary, even if I don't tell my wife that I'm wary. I want her to relax and have a good time. I'm always armed, something 357 or higher, and she's pretty used to that anyway. We tend to stay up north a bit more, and as it seems to be not as prevalent there.
Alexa, episode 100.
It was late December. My father has a brother who lives in London, and it's, a family tradition that my father and his girlfriend go visit my uncle over New Year's Eve every year since, I don't know how many years, but it's been a lot of years. And as always, they asked me to stay in the house and look over the dog and just watch out that nothing happens so someone is there. Because you can just see from afar that the house is worth its money. You can see it. We do have our cars parked in front of it, and just by that I think it's a paradise for every burglar. And so I agreed to stay over the week where they're in London, my father and his girlfriend, and watch the dog, a German Shepherd, who's huge. He's huge, but it's just a sweetheart. The first 2 days were just normal. I was enjoying the free time. I was enjoying being alone, in the seclusion of the area. I like to be myself, to be on myself, actually, and I enjoy the quietness of that place. But the third day, when I took my dog out for a walk, and I opened the door, I immediately got that feeling that something wasn't right. I cannot explain that. I think it's a feeling you get when you know something is not okay. I just can't describe it as, my gut telling me something is wrong. I had that feeling one time when my grandmother died, and I got exactly that feeling in the stomach. And I knew something wasn't right, and an hour later, my mother called, and she said my grandmother was dead. So I took my dog for a walk, and you have to imagine it's a long, long path, just surrounded by meadows and forest, and it goes on for miles. You can literally walk straight forward for 3 hours before you reach the next street. So it's pretty secluded. And while I was walking, I got that feeling that, it just got stronger, that something wasn't right. I had the urge to just turn around every time and look behind me. And my dog was acting completely normal, and just brushed it off as me being paranoid. And, normally I walk for hours. I can just put my headphones on and just walk straight for 1 or 2 hours. It's relaxing for me. But that day, I think I just walked 20 or 30 minutes before I just couldn't stand that feeling anymore, that something wasn't right. And I practically turned around on my heels, and I literally ran back home. And as soon as I reached my front door, I just bolted inside and I shut the door. I actually locked it, which is very unusual for me because normally when I'm there, I just leave it open. I even leave the key outside of the door because who's going to come in at that area? So I'm normally just leaving the key outside. I know I have a huge dog inside that house, and every normal thinking person would not walk into a house where a 50-kilo German Shepherd sits on the opposite side of the door and looks at you and just barks at you, and the entire walls are shaking. No normal thinking person would walk into a house like that. So I just locked the door, which is very unusual, and I just left it as that. I did not open the front door until I had to go out to get firewood for the fireplace inside my living room. So that's the only time when I unlocked the door, jumped out, got the wood, and I jumped practically back in. I just left the door as it was, and I was trying to shake off the feeling of being uncomfortable, just thinking, I'm inside my house, everything is okay, no one's going to come in. I just let the evening pass by, watching TV. For everyone thinking this comes out of imagination, I am a huge scaredy cat. So I do not watch horror movies or psycho thrillers or whatever comes into mind when I'm home alone. I do not watch these movies because I get really bad nightmares from that. I just leave my fingers from that. And I was watching my favorite TV show, which is Gossip Girl, so no one can think I'm watching, I don't know, Hannibal or something. I was getting thirsty. I walked into the kitchen, got a glass out of the cupboard, and opened the fridge, and got a bottle of water out of it. My dog was just sleeping on his basket, snoring in peace, so everything was fine, everything was quiet. And you have to imagine that around the house, there are not many lights. We have one or two, I don't know if you have these things in America, it's just, they're small solar light. And it's just charged by sunlight. And it just illuminates the area just a little with the light it's stored over the day. We have one or two of these small solar lights in our garden. So there are just two tiny spots illuminated by that, and it's just, such a pale light. You can just imagine it as very, very weak moonlight. So it does not help anything. And on my terrace, which is in front of the kitchen, there are two sliding doors, so we can exit through the kitchen onto the terrace. And the terrace had two small lights I always turn on in the evening when it gets dark outside. And they're very weak. These are not like huge floodlights. Absolutely not. These are normal lights you put outside of a house wall. So they just illuminated the terrace, nothing more. I just was about to fill in the glass with water, and, suddenly I heard a sound behind me, and my dog was standing. He just jumped from his sleep, and he just stared outside of the window. He just pressed his nose against the glass, and he was staring right out into the darkness. And I was just thinking, I just brushed it off, thinking, oh, it's a deer. He hates deer. And I just said, oh, lay down again. You're being stupid. And he just didn't move. And I noticed that he started to raise his fur. And that's very unlikely for him because he's, as I already mentioned, he may be big, but he's a gentle giant. And he starts to growl and he starts to bark. And it was I think it was close to 12 or 11 p.m. So I was not in any mood for any ruckus. And I was like, oh, shut up. You're being stupid. Just lay down. It's a deer. It's nothing. Shut up. But he did not shut up, and I was even more concerned when he started to completely act out of character. He started to jump against the window doors, and I was like, are you nuts? Stop that! What are you doing? And that was the moment it just crossed my mind. Oh no, there's someone out there, and I am alone inside this house. Great. My biggest nightmare has come to life. But I was still, screaming at my dog. Well, not screaming, but commanding him to stop because it was really obnoxious right then. I looked out of the window and I saw something moving in the dark. It just moved outside of the radius that the light illuminated. I could see something moving, but I couldn't see what. But then, against the dark, I remember that so clearly because the little small last pieces of light from the terrace lights just illuminated the outside of the silhouette. And I thought, it's huge. That was the first thing I noticed. I couldn't see what it was. I didn't know what it was, but I could see that it was huge. I saw broad shoulders, and I could see the upper torso. The next thing is just like a scene from a horror movie. And I could see a big thigh, just standing out against the light because he moved that thigh into the light. The thigh was the first thing I saw. And I was thinking, what is that? And then I saw the second thigh. And then it moved entirely into the light. And I think everything froze. Everything was just stopping. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I just could stare. And that thing was out of anything possible. I don't know how to describe how I felt at that moment. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel panic. I was just frozen. I think my brain, I heard that your brain compares something that you never saw before with something that you have already seen before. And the only thing I could think at that moment was werewolf. That was the only thing I could compare that thing with as it stepped into the light. My dog was still freaking out, and I was standing there completely in shock. I wasn't moving. I was just looking at it. And it was just so scary. It was, in hindsight, I don't know how I managed not to, faint or run away or scream. I still don't know how I did that. I just stared at it. And the head, I just can tell you that the head just grazed the roof of my terrace. So it was huge. Yes, you see, I am 5'2", so I'm tiny. I'm really tiny. And that thing was, I would say you can put myself on my shoulders and have my double height, and that thing would have still been 1.5 head taller than me. And, just the face. I don't know if I can call it face. This was not a human face. Even though the body resembled human, the face did not. And the body did not. I don't know what to say or how to describe that, but it was just huge, and it was just horrible. It was a nightmare. And it took a step towards the glass. And that was probably the moment I started to freak out. You know, I grabbed my dog on its tail, and it's not very gentle, but I pulled him back on his fur, on his legs, on his tail. I just grabbed him, and I just stood there and knelt over with my dog, and that thing stood in front of my terrace door. Just a glass door, not bulletproofed or anything, just a normal glass door separating me from a thing that, in my opinion, did not exist until that second, until that moment. And it just looked at me, and I was looking at it, and it just lifted its hands, and that is just, you know, the only thing I could compare to that is a raccoon. You know, raccoons have these tiny little fingers, just that it had so much longer fingers and very thick, very broad fingers. You know, fingers you would normally see on a man working very hard. And that was the moment I thought, I'm done. I just got to my knees next to my dog, and I thought, this is it. I'm going to die. And I freaked out. I just freaked out, and I just screamed at it. I yelled, get out, leave me alone, just go away. I was yelling every profanity at it that I could think of. And I was just screaming and yelling, and oh my God, it was just such a ruckus because my dog was still freaking out. But that thing did not even flinch at that. It was just staring at me with its eyes fixated on me. And it lifted his hand, and, you know, I'm saying he because I had the very distinctive feeling that it was male. So I don't know if I have to say it or he. I didn't know if it was a he, but for me it felt like a male. And, you know, it just lifted his hand, and with one claw, I remember that claw really well because it was just branded into my memory, that sound of the claw against the window. And it was not, you know, turned or round like that of a cat or a dog. It was more straight, but still it had, you know, a small curl to its end. So it was like a rose thorn. You can imagine, just a very, very, very big and very sharp. And it just tapped against the window. It was the most, I cannot tell you how terrifying for me that was, because, you know, such a movement is just, that's human. I do not know any animal who would tap against a window with one claw. I do not know one single animal. And just the face, it was just, you know, while it tapped against the window, and you have to remember that it was now in the full broad light. Just not broad, but it was enough for me to see very good, for me to get a clear image. The face, I just saw the lips moving up. I could see the wrinkles forming on the nose, you know, like when a dog starts to growl. I could see the wrinkles forming on its nose while it tapped against the window. It was just so horrible. It was the most horrible thing I've ever seen. And I've seen one or two pretty bad things over my life. And nothing could compare to that. Nothing. I think, there will be in the future nothing that compares to that. Never ever will anything compare to that. And, it just, I have the feeling that it was, that it was growling, snarling. I didn't hear anything. I was just screaming, over my screaming and over the barking. I'm surprised I heard, the tapping. It's just probably, a sound that just ran it into my memory that just stands out because I just remember it so clearly. And while it pulled up its lips like a dog would, and his eyes were just still fixated on me. I don't know how to explain that, but I had this horrible feeling that I had to get closer. It's just, it's a horrible, it was a horrible feeling. It was like driving by an accident and you shouldn't look. You're just driving by the car wreck and you shouldn't look and you shouldn't stop or watch or do anything, come closer to it, but you cannot help because you want to know what happened. I know it's a very bad example. I know it's very, very, I think it's a bad example, but that's the only thing I could ever compare to it. This feeling. I had the feeling, when we locked eyes, that it was almost, for me, it was almost in my head. It was like I heard, or more I had the feeling, I don't really know how to say that. I just had the feeling that it was like luring me in. And that was a horrible feeling because I couldn't help myself. I just wanted to get closer. And, my common sense just screamed at me, don't get closer. Don't do that. Don't get any closer to that thing. It's going to kill you. It's going to murder you. But, that other thing, that need to get closer to that thing, it was just there, and it was so hard to fight against it. It was real battle for me to stay right next to my dog. I held onto his fur almost as an anchor to not go to that thing. I wanted to, actually, you have to imagine that. I wanted to put my hand against the glass just to get closer, and I was, at the same time, for me it was almost hypnotic. And I just could pull myself out of that feeling, out of that loop long enough to always tell myself, don't get closer. Don't do that. Never do that. Just stay where you are. And I was still yelling, I was still screaming. I was still saying, get away from me. Get out of here. I don't want you here. And I thought, I'm done. I'm really done for. Because that thing, as huge as it was, it could have easily broken the glass. It could have jumped right through it. And, you know, it was still tapping as if to tell me, you stupid girl, there's just nothing that can stop me from getting you. It was almost like I had these words in my head of him telling me there's nothing that's going to stop me to get you if I wanted to. You know, it almost had something mocking the way it did, and that was so shocking for me. You know, now in hindsight, because I did not think that exact thought at the moment it was happening, but now, you know, reminiscing the encounter, I had the feeling that it was mocking, you know, as it was saying, I am the predator and you the prey, and you should know your place, and I could get you any time I wanted you. And I was just kneeling on the floor, and I was thinking, get away from me. And I'm not I didn't know how I should say that, but I'm not a big believer. You know, I'm not Christian or Catholic or anything. I respect every religion. I have no doubts that there's something that, I don't know how to say that. I believe in good and bad. I believe things happen out of a purpose. I think good things always come with bad things. That is my believing. I do not say I do not believe in God. I just say I don't know if I believe in God, but I believe in something. And I never prayed before because I think it's just wrong for someone to pray who is not a real believer or, you know, a strong believer. And at that moment, it was the first time in my life I was praying. I was just praying, dear God, please don't let me die this way. Not this way. Just make him leave. I want to live. And it just, I have the feeling that it was laughing. You know, I could practically hear inside of my head that rumbling in that huge chest, and it was such a horrible feeling. I don't know if it was my imagination at that time, or if it was really, if these things are capable of, you know, laughing at someone, but I had the feeling that it was laughing at me because I was praying. And, you know, the next thing I see is that it just turned, you know, it just gave me one last look when I think, you know, in hindsight, I think he got bored with me, not running away, and he just turned to his side so I could see the side of his back, and it was just as muscled as the front. I could see the tendons of muscles under the fur when it moved, and it just left the claw on my window, and it walked down the side of the house and dragged the claw along the glass. And it was such a horrible feeling. It was not only the feeling I got from the sound, but the sound will always stay in my mind. You know, do you remember these kids who were just such brats, who dragged their fingernails down the blackboard just to, you know, anger the other kids in the class? It was just exactly that sound. And it moved slowly out of the light of my terrace. But just before it completely melted back into the darkness of the night, it just stopped and looked over its shoulder just like a human would, which I found was such a horrible movement because it just looked so natural on him that I had the feeling that it did not look at a human over his shoulder only at that time. It just looked so natural. It just looked so fluent in that movement. And it gave me one last long stare. And it just looked at me, and I swear until today that he narrowed his eyes. And I had, once again, I had this feeling that it, was thinking like, I'll come back for you. It was just what I had, what just read out of that gaze, out of the glare it threw to me. And it felt like, I'll come back for you. There's no need to run. I'll come back for you. I'll get you. And then it turned around and just vanished into the darkness, which was just terrifying. That was the moment I started to feel panic. And I started to get really, really scared. My dog was still freaking out, and I was just clamping my hands over his muzzle to shut him up, to hear anything, any sound, or if I would hear tapping against the window once again, or the scratching. You have to remember that it moved down towards my living room, which is just like my kitchen, made of glass. And I was thinking, okay, it's going to come through the living room, and it's going to get me, and it's toying with me. It's making me feel safe, and then it's going to get me. It's just going to come through the window, and then I'm done. And I waited, and I waited, and I listened. And I just tried to listen to everything. And I don't know how long I sat there, how long I've been in the kitchen, but it must have been a time. I think it must have been good 10, 15 minutes. And I was sitting there, and I was just, my mind was racing what I could do. My house is not made for getting into height. It's just not made for that. Everything is made of glass. You cannot hide in that house. And I thought, should I go into the bathroom? But there is a window. Even though I could pull down the blinds, it's just a paper blind. You can see through that. And if I'm correct, at that moment, that thing has eyes like an animal, and it can see in the dark. And I was thinking, it doesn't matter if I have these paper blinds down. These are really made of paper. So it's not any shield. It's just, a little blended, so you cannot see if someone is naked inside, to just cover it up. And I was thinking, I cannot hide in the bathroom. The doors in the house beside of the glass doors and the front door, they are made of wood. And I was thinking, that thing, it can come through the glass, and it can tear down the door with just a blink of its eye. And I would have no chance of running out of the bathroom once it cornered me there. That was just, at the moment, I don't know how I managed to, but that was just logical thinking. At that moment, I was trying to think of every possibility to get out of the house and alive. And for me, it was the most logical thing at that moment to stay in the kitchen. And my car keys were just an arm's reach away from me on the kitchen counter. And my front door just another 2 feet from me at that moment. And my car, I drive a very big car. It's a very big SUV by VW. And, you know, we have a small gate at the start of our property. And my father had to remove a part of the gate so I could fit my car through there. So you can imagine it's pretty big. It's pretty broad. And I don't like to park it in the carport because it's very narrow, together with the cars of my father and the Audi of my father's girlfriend. And I just don't like to park there because it's just so crowded, and I'm always scared of driving against the cars. So I normally drive up to the front door, so I can just drive down in a straight path through the gate. And I did just that. I parked my car at the morning when I came home from grocery shopping. I parked my car in front of the door, so I didn't have to run with the groceries all over the place. So I was thinking, I have 2 feet left until I'm in my car, and I can drive straight down. I can escape that way. I can. And if that thing comes, I can jump into my car, I can just steer out of there, and I'm gone. So it was just like waiting. I was just, you know, thinking, which way would be better? Of how can I survive? Or is that, let me put it another way, if that thing really does come after me, or inside my home, how can I survive the most? And I was thinking it was the best way to stay exactly there. And I was still waiting, and, you know, my dog was a little calmer now. You know, it was still growling, and it was still, you know, he had his ears all over the place, and I think he was looking for, you know, hearing for that thing. And that was the moment I just grabbed my car keys, ran to the front door, just quickly looked. You know, you have to remember there is a glass door. You know, there's a glass front right next to the front door. I just took a quick look outside. I opened the front door. I just practically reeled down the 2 steps, opened the car door, and let my dog jump in. I slammed the door shut behind me, and I stared out of there. My tires were reeling through, and I was speeding down my gateway and down onto the street. And here in Germany, we have a speed limit, and that's 62 miles per hour on county roads. I think I was, I don't know how many miles I was too fast, but I was just steering down that street. I was really racing. I was going by 93 miles per hour, where only 62 miles were allowed. I did not dare to look into my rear mirror. I tried not to, but I did. I always constantly looked into the rear mirror, and I tried to see if it was there or if not. I was trying to calm myself down, saying this thing could not hold up with a car going almost 94 miles per hour. So I just reeled out of there into town. I'm living on my own in a 2-floor apartment in the suburb of Hamburg, and I felt safer. I felt better as soon as I saw my house. I don't know. It's in the contract it says apartment. I say it's a house because it has 2 floors. And I took out the dog. I ran inside. I let down every blind I had. I have. It's just. I think it's just bad luck at that moment. I have glass doors all over the place. So I let every single electronical blind down I had, and I just sat down for a second. I grabbed my landline, and I just called my best friend. I think it was the middle of the night. It was almost 12:30. I think I estimated it was almost 12:30, going to 1 o'clock. And I was just calling my best friend, and she just picked up the call, and she was like, hello? So she was in deep slumber, and I just babbled. I was just like, oh my God, it's just so weird. I don't know what to do. I'm home. I need help. I was just crying on the phone. And I don't know if I said any current sentence that she understood, but I just heard, the rustling of blankets, and then she just said, I'm there in 20 minutes. And she was there in 20 minutes, still in her PGs and everything, but she was there. I told her everything that happened, and she did not doubt me. She just listened, and she made me a cup of tea so I could calm down, because I didn't notice, but I was just shaking. I was shaking from head to toe. I couldn't even hold the cup still while I was drinking. And, she said, we'll go to sleep now. Everything is okay. We're safe in here. You're going to rest now, or you're going to faint. And tomorrow we're going to your house. We're going to look. And I was just immediately there, no, I don't want to go there. Maybe it's still there. Maybe it just waits for me. And she was like, if I have any bad feeling about this, we're going to turn around immediately. Just to say that, my best friend, I don't know how to say that, but for me, she has something like an empath. She is very talented in feeling certain things. We do not believe in the paranormal, like ghosts and everything. We're not some crazy chicks who go out on the weekends to hunt for ghosts or something like that. We're not doing that. We're not into those things. We just say there's something beyond human understanding, and we're okay with that, but we don't need to know. And she just feels things. You can come into a room, and she can tell you you're sad, or you're angry, or you're whatever, even though you're just very neutral in the face. You just don't give anything away, and she can tell you, pinpoint what you're feeling right now. We had an incident when we were in Madrid together. We booked a hotel room, and she came into the room, and she got pale as a sheet, and she said, something really bad happened in here. Later, we asked one of the housemates, and she said, yes, a husband murdered his wife in that room. And my best friend could tell that. She said she didn't know what happened. She just knew something bad happened. And I trust her. I trust her completely. And if she says it's okay, and if she says the air is clear, then it's clear. For me, it is. We went to sleep. I did not get any sleep that night. And later the next morning, we drove over to her house, and she had a thing for old daggers. She gets them from everywhere, from antique stores, from the internet. She just, she likes to collect them, and she has a huge cupboard where all these beautiful daggers are. I said, we cannot go there. I was still very, very frightened of going back. And she said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to drive over to my house, we're going to get a dagger, and then we're going to drive over to your house, and we're going to look. So we drove to her house, got a few daggers, or more she, because I cannot handle these things, but she goes to a special training course to handle them so she does not hurt herself or hurt others with them. And I felt much safer, even though it was just a tiny little knife, nothing more than a pocket knife. And we drove over to my house, or to my father's house, and got out of the car, and I felt the shift in the air just like she did. You know, she did not feel what I felt the other day when it happened, but I felt that something was different. This eerie feeling, this feeling in my gut that told me something was not right, was gone. It just felt normal. And she looked at me and she said, it's okay. It's no longer here. And I noticed something else. The day before, I did not notice, but something for me felt wrong because I noticed there were no sounds. You know, even in winter, the birds are making small sounds, you know, not like in spring when they're on full-blown, you know, volume, but they do make sounds. And that was completely gone. And now I heard a few birds here and there chirping. We looked around the property and we tried to find any tracks or any signs, but we found nothing because here in Germany you cannot imagine winter as a winter with snow and huge white mountains of fresh fluffy snow. Here in Germany it means fog, it means snow rain, and it means rain. So every track there would have been the night before was gone with the rain. You know, the grass was flattened down by the strong rain over the night, and there was nothing we could have found. There was no sign it ever happened. You know, and for a quick second, I just questioned myself if I just imagined it. But I told myself, no, you did not. You did not imagine that. It really happened. And we walked inside, and at first I didn't want to stay, but she convinced me to stay just to see if there was anything going to happen. Now I have to agree with her. I could have not let my father live in a house knowing that something like that is around. I could have not. I did not care if he would have declared me as absolutely insane or anything. I would have not let him, you know, live in a house with something so dangerous around. And she convinced me to stay just because of that, to see if something happens again, if we get a bad feeling again. And she said, as soon as we get a bad feeling, we're out. We're going to just drive, and we're not going to wait for what happens, we're just going to drive. But everything was okay. Nothing happened. You know, my best friend stayed with me over the last days until my father returned, and as soon as my dad got back, I told him, Daddy, there was a burglar here. He was walking around the house. I was shouting at him, and I told him to go away, but he didn't. And he told me that he would get, you know, electrical blinds, like I do have at my apartment, at my house. And I think 1 or 2 weeks after I told my dad that there was the burglar, aka my worst nightmare, the electrical blinds were on. There was a technician who installed them for us, and yeah, that's how it all went down.
Well, that's it for tonight's show, everyone. Thank you so much, as always, for listening.